Hi, and welcome back to Storytime. So today we are concluding. I'm looking at Maestro, by the way, he's right here. You're so cute. Today we're going to be finishing Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie, and then tomorrow we're going to start, I think it's the mystery, the Secret of Chimneys, that's right, it's over there. I can see it from here. So yeah. This is a 1920s? Yeah, 1920s post-World War I espionage story. So I'm having fun with it. I love the two main characters, Tommy and Tuppence, who have formed this sort of a not detective agency, adventuring, the young adventurers. And I love the way that they talk, calling each other old thing and everything. It's a lot of fun. And who knows how long Maestro is going to be here. He is in my lap. Let's see if I can show you. Well, let's see. Sorry. There we go. Maestro. Hey, look up at the camera. Hey, silly. Okay, he's not going to look, but you know he is there. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. I know that you can see my tiaras. The tiaras I used to do was an everyday thing that I used to do at my job, my day job, is working at an independent bookstore. And I used to wear one every single day. I've made them all. This is one of my favorites. It is, oh, hang on a second. Bad light. There we go. So it is sort of, I forget what, brocade or something like that, the kind of fabric. The base of all of them are pipe cleaners. Hey, Corral, good to see you. Maestro is here in my lap, so he's joining us. I'm just explaining about my tiaras. This one actually was inspired by, this Maestro. Okay, well, Maestro, hey, Pants, don't go away. Maestro, come here. He just got out of my lap. Come here, you silly. Girl's giving you a treat. Come on. That is from Corel. One of these days, I think his mouth is going to water every time he hears your name, Corel. Because you're always so awesome to the kitties. Yep. You want to join me in my lap again? Not sure. Anyways, yeah. Oh, nice. Congratulations. Yeah, I'm still not eligible for it. I'm too young and I'm too healthy. And I also they don't think that I work at a dangerous enough job, but I don't know, retails can be pretty dangerous. Oh, okay. Yeah, nice. I figured that might be how. Use your perks when you can. So that's awesome. I'm really glad for you. Shall we go ahead and... Oh, yeah, I know. I've heard some people say that... Sorry about that. My manager, who works in a doctor's office when she's not working at the bookstore, she said that it was a lot like when she had mono, just like sleeping all the time. So it was just like the next day or the weekend following or however long it was. She was just sleeping like crazy. But after the second shot, she didn't get any symptoms. She didn't really feel any different except for a little bit of tenderness where she got the shot. And then all of her family members or all of the friends that she had that got their shots too, after the first shot, they didn't get anything, and she was like, grumble about that. But then after their second shot, they were getting hit with, not feeling the best, and she's just like, I'm fine. We'll see. Oh, okay, nice. The one shot, that's really nice. I don't know which one will be available when I eventually get mine. Who knows when that will be. But, yeah. We'll see. I think that at least the numbers around here have shown that women tend to be a little more susceptible than men, so I think that's the one thing I have going for me. We'll see. But yeah, I think I would prefer the one-shot deal as opposed to they get one and then after a month get another. Oh, no, I didn't hear about that. I'll have to look that up later. Yeah, I'm writing that down. That will be interesting. And I'm not really all that surprised. There are some very interesting people in California. Yep, for sure. Yeah, we had somebody come into the store the other day without a mask, and luckily my manager was up there because I didn't really, I mean, I heard it, but it didn't really register. And so, she's like, you need to be wearing a mask to come in here. And the lady was like raising hell, but she put on her mask. And then her friend was like, you need to be a little bit kinder. And it's like, well, you know what? You need to be a little bit healthier and more conscientious of other people and put on your mask so we don't all get sick. Thank you very much, because it's still going on. There's a reason why it's still going on. But yeah, that was the other day. Today it's story time. And we are all as safely distanced as we can be, safe in our homes, watching screens or being on the screen. So I don't know how long. Oh, we might be going a little bit over today, but I don't mind if you don't mind. Yeah, but that is very, very true. Or more. Who knows? It's kind of weird, like, before streaming, I used to think of, like, where people were in the world, and now it's just, like, it doesn't even register to me that, some people are watching from Australia, some from Germany, some from, the South, some from the Midwest, and, Arkansas, nice. I think, have I been to Arkansas? I think I have. I've been to many, many places on road trips, but that was like 25 years ago. Ooh, I'm old. I looked at myself when I was turning on the camera, and I'm like, wow, I'm old. And then I've been noticing my hands getting a little bit, the skin's getting a little bit looser, and it's like, yes, I am 40 after all. I just don't sound it. But I have been, I've been cracking up my new coworkers. We hired 4 new people very recently, and so it's funny hearing their reactions to things I say all the time, like when people are like, oh, you look so young, and then I tell them that my beauty technique is that every time I see a wrinkle, I gain a few pounds, and then I smooth out the wrinkle with the fat, and they think it's hilarious. So it's refreshing. It'll get old on them quickly. No, not as old as you. But that's another great thing about the internet is, like, we're all just sort of, like, handles or, avatars and stuff. So I play with people on RuneScape. I watch people streaming, and then, of course, I stream, and I have people who watch, and it's like we're all just sort of ageless people on here. Oh, okay. You don't look your age at all. And every time I mention to people, I'm middle-aged, they're like, no, you're not. And it's like, hey, I earned my middle-agedness. And if you think about it, if you take 100 years, being sort of an average, Your young age is from, of course, when you're 1 to about 33, and then 34 to 63, thereabouts, is middle aged, and then old age would be like 64, or no, it would be to 66, and then 67 on would be your old age if you're cutting it up into kind of thirds, thereabouts. Anyways, let us go ahead and get started. Hey, Vance, you gonna join me? We also have a scratching post like right here. Oh, there we go. Nope, still can't see. Okay, well, it's over there. That's where the scratching post is. So if he joins me up back there and does the thing where he just hooks his claw in the back of my head because he wants to nuzzle the back of my head, I'll move the camera so you can see. It's really cute. Alrighty, let us get started. So we'll make Maestro hide. Chapter 20, we're jumping right in. Too late. In the street they held an informal council of war. Sir James had drawn a watch from his pocket. The boat train to Holyhead stops at Chester at 12:14. If you start at once, I think you can catch the connection. Tommy looked puzzled. Is there any need to hurry, sir? Today is only the 24th. I guess it's always well to get up early in the morning, said Julius, before the lawyer had time to reply. We'll make tracks for the depot right away. A little frown had settled on Sir James' brow. I wish I could come with you. I'm due to speak at a meeting at 2 o'clock. It's unfortunate. The reluctance in his tone was very evident. It was clear, on the other hand, that Julius was easily disposed to put up with the loss of the other's company. I guess there's nothing complicated about this deal, he remarked. Just a game of hide-and-seek, that's all. I hope so, said Sir James. Sure thing. What else could it be? You are still young, Mr. Hersheimer. At my age, you will probably have learnt one lesson. Never underestimate your adversary. The gravity of his tone impressed Tommy, but had little effect upon Julius. You think Mr. Brown might come along and take a hand? If he does, I'm ready for him. He slapped his pocket. I carry a gun. Little Willie here travels around with me everywhere. He produced a murderous-looking automatic and tapped it affectionately before returning it to its home. But he won't be needed on this trip. There's nobody to put Mr. Brown wise. The lawyer shrugged his shoulders. There's nobody to put Mr. Brown wise to the fact that Mrs. Vandermeyer meant to betray him. Nevertheless, Mrs. Vandermeyer died without speaking. Julius was silenced for once, and Sir James added on a lighter note. I only want to put you on your guard. Goodbye and good luck. Take no unnecessary risks once the papers are in your hands. If there is any reason to believe that you have been shadowed, destroy them at once. Good luck to you. The game is in your hands now. He shook hands with them both. 10 minutes later, the two men were seated in a first-class carriage en route for Chester. For a long time, neither of them spoke. When at length Julius broke the silence, it was with a totally unexpected remark. Say, he observed thoughtfully, did you ever make a darn fool of yourself over a girl's face? Tommy, after a moment's astonishment, searched his mind. Can't say that I have, he replied at last. Not that I can recollect, anyhow. Why? Because for the last months I've been making a sentimental fool of myself over Jane. First moment I clapped eyes on her photograph, my heart did all the usual stunts you read about in novels. Guess I'm ashamed to admit it, but I came over here determined to find her and fix it all up, and take her back as Mrs. Julia P. Hersheimer. Oh, said Tommy, amazed. Julius uncrossed his legs brusquely and continued. Just shows what an almighty fool a man can be to himself. Just shows what an almighty fool a man can make of himself. One look at a girl in the flesh, and I was cured. Feeling more tongue-tied than ever, Tommy ejaculated, "Oh," again. "No disparagement to Jane, mind you," continued the other. "She's a real nice girl, and some fellow will fall in love with her right away." "I thought her a very good-looking girl," said Tommy, finding his tongue. "Sure she is. But she's not like her photo one bit. At least I suppose she is in a way, must be, because I recognized her right off. If I'd seen her in a crowd, I'd said, 'There's a girl whose face I know right away without hesitation,' but there was something about that photo." Julius shook his head and heaved a sigh. "I guess romance is a mighty queer thing." "It must be," said Tommy coldly. "If you can come over here in love with one girl and propose to another within a fortnight." Julius had the grace to look discomposed. "Well, you see, I've got sort of feelings that I'd never find Jane, and that it was all plumb foolishness anyways, and then, oh, well, the French, for instance, are more sensible in the ways they look at things. They keep romance and marriage apart." Tommy flushed. "Well, I'm damned if that's—" Julius hastened to interrupt. "Say now, don't be hasty. I don't mean what you mean. I take it Americans have a higher opinion of morality than you have even. What I meant was that the French set about marriage in a business-like way. Find two people who are suited to one another, look after the money affairs, and see the whole thing practically and in a business-like spirit." "Well, if you ask me," said Tommy, "we're all too damn business-like nowadays. We're always saying, 'Will it pay?' The men are bad enough, and the girls are worse." "Cool down, son. Don't get so heated." "I feel heated," said Tommy. Julius looked at him and judged it wise to say no more. However, Tommy had plenty of time to cool down before they reached Holyhead, and the cheerful grin had returned to his countenance as they alighted at their distinction. After consultation, and with the aid of a road map, they were fairly well agreed as to direction, so were able to hire a taxi without more ado and drive on the road leading to Trurdur. That is a weird spelling. Trearddur. So Trurdur Bay. There we go. Well, we'll keep with that. They instructed the man to go slowly and watch narrowly so as not to miss the path. They came to it not long after leaving the town, and Tommy stopped the car promptly, asked in a casual tone whether the path led down to the sea, and hearing it did, paid off the man in handsome style. A moment later the taxi was slowly chugging back to Holyhead. Tommy and Julius watched it out of sight, and then turned to the narrow path. "It's the right one, I suppose?" asked Tommy doubtfully. "There must be simply heaps along here." "Sure it is. Look at the gorse. Remember what Jane said?" Tommy looked at the swelling hedges of golden blossom which bordered the path on either side, and was convinced. They went down in single file, Julius leading. Twice Tommy turned his head uneasily. Julius looked back. "What is it?" "I don't know. I've got the wind-up somehow. Keep fancying there's someone following us." "Can't be," said Julius positively. "We'd see him." Tommy had to admit that this was true. Nevertheless, his sense of uneasiness deepened. In spite of himself, he believed in the omniscience of the enemy. "I rather wish that fellow would come along," said Julius. He patted his pocket. "Little William here is just aching for exercise." "Do you always carry him with you?" inquired Tommy with burning curiosity. "Most always. I guess you never know what might turn up." Tommy kept a respectful silence. He was impressed by little William. He seemed to remove the menace of Mr. Brown farther away. The path was now running along the side of the cliff, parallel to the sea. Suddenly, Julius came to such an abrupt halt that Tommy cannoned into him. "What's up?" he inquired. "Look there. If that doesn't beat the band." Tommy looked. Standing out and half obstructing the path was a huge boulder which certainly bore a fanciful resemblance to a begging terrier. "Well," said Tommy, refusing to share Julius' emotions, "it's what we expected to see, isn't it?" Julius looked at him sadly and shook his head. "British phlegm. Sure, we expected it, but it kind of rattles me all the same to see it sitting there just where we expected to find it." Tommy, whose calm was, perhaps, more assumed than natural, moved his feet impatiently. "Push on. What about the hole?" They scanned the cliff-side narrowly. Tommy heard himself saying idiotically, "The gorse won't be there after all these years." And Julius replied solemnly, "I guess you're right." Tommy suddenly pointed with a shaking hand. "What about that crevice there?" Julius replied in an awe-stricken voice, That's it. For sure." They looked at each other. "When I was in France," said Tommy reminiscently, "whenever my Batman failed to call me, he always said that he had come over queer. I never believed it. But whether he felt it or not, there is such a sensation. I've got it now, badly." He looked at the rock with a kind of agonized passion. "Damn it!" he cried. "It's impossible! 5 years! Think of it! Birds nesting, boys, picnic parties, thousands of people passing. It can't be here. It's 100 to 1 against its being there. It's against all reason." Indeed, he felt it to be impossible. More perhaps because he could not believe in his own success, where so many others had failed. The thing was too easy. Therefore, it could not be. The hole would be empty. Julius looked at him with a widening smile. "I guess you're rattled now, all right," he drawled with some enjoyment. "Well, here goes." He thrust his hand into the crevice and made a slight grimace. Every time I read about somebody thrusting their hand into a crevice or a hole or something like that, I always think of spiders. And bleh, kind of like, just like, why are you putting your hand in there? No, put a glove on. Ah, well. That's just me. He thrust his hand into the crevice and made a slight grimace. "Oh, it's a tight fit. James' hands must be a few sizes smaller than mine. I don't feel anything. No. Oh, say, what's this? Gee whiz!" And with a flourish he waved aloft a small disclosed packet. "Is the goods all right? Sewn up in oilskin. Hold it while I get my penknife." The unbelievable had happened. Tommy held the precious packet tenderly between his hands. They had succeeded. "It's queer," he murmured idly. "You'd think the stitches would have rotted. They look just as good as new." They cut them carefully and ripped away the oilskin. Inside was a small folded sheet of paper. With trembling fingers they unfolded it. The sheet was blank. They stared at each other, puzzled. "A dummy," hazarded Julius. "Was Danvers just a decoy?" Tommy shook his head. That solution did not satisfy him. Suddenly his face cleared. "I've got it! Sympathetic ink!" "You think so?" "Worth trying anyhow. Heat usually does the trick. Get some sticks. We'll make a fire." In a few minutes the little fire of twigs and leaves was blazing merrily. Tommy held the sheet of paper near the glow. The paper curled a little with the heat, nothing more. Suddenly Julius grasped his arms and pointed to where characters were appearing in a faint brown color. "Gee whiz, you've got it! Say, that idea of yours was great. It never occurred to me." Tommy held the paper in position some minutes longer until he judged the heat had done its work. Then he withdrew it a moment later. He uttered a cry. Across the sheet, in neat brown printing, the words ran, "With the compliments of Mr. Brown." My thought is that they probably hired another girl to fake being Jane. But we will see. That would be why the picture didn't really, when he saw her, of course she looked the same, but There wasn't that something that was in the picture. That's just my thought. Chapter 21. Tommy makes a discovery. For a moment or two they stood staring at each other stupidly, dazed with the shock. Somehow, inexplicably, Mr. Brown had forestalled them. Tommy accepted defeat quietly. Not so Julius. How in tarnation did he get ahead of us? That's what beats me, he ended up. Tommy shook his head and said dully, "It accounts for the stitches being new. We might have guessed." "Never mind the darn stitches. How did he get ahead of us? We hustled all we knew. It's downright impossible for anyone to get here quicker than we did. And anyway, how did you know? Do you reckon there was a dictaphone in Jane's room?" "I guess there must have been." But Tommy's common sense pointed out objections. No one could have known beforehand that she was going to be in that house, much less that particular room. "That's so," admitted Julius. "And one of the nurses was a crook and listened at the door. How's that?" "I don't see that it matters anyway," said Tommy wearily. "He may have found out some months ago and removed the papers then. Now, by Jove, that won't wash. They'd have been published at once." "Sure thing they would. Now, someone's got ahead of us today by an hour or so. But how they did it gets my goat." "I wish that chap Peel Edgerton had been with us," said Tommy thoughtfully. "Why?" Julius stared. "The mischief was done when we came." "Yes?" Tommy hesitated. He could not explain his own feeling, the illogical idea that the K.C.'s presence would somehow have averted the catastrophe. He reverted to his former point of view. "It's no good arguing about how it was done. The game's up. We've failed. There's only one thing for me to do." "What's that?" "Get back to London as soon as possible. Mr. Carter must be warned. It's only a matter of hours now before the blow falls. But at any rate, he ought to know the worst." The duty was an unpleasant one, but Tommy had no intention of shirking it. He must report his failure to Mr. Carter. After that, his work was done. He took the midnight mail to London. Julius elected to stay the night at Holyhead. Half an hour after arrival, haggard and pale, Tommy stood before his chief. "I've come to report, sir, I've failed. Failed badly." Mr. Carter eyed him sharply. "You mean that the treaty is in the hands of Mr. Brown, sir?" "Ah," said Mr. Carter quietly. His expression on his face did not change, but Tommy caught the flicker of despair in his eyes. It convinced him, as nothing else had done, that the outlook was hopeless. "Well," said Mr. Carter after a minute or two, "we mustn't sag at the knees, I suppose. I'm glad to know definitely we must do what we can." Though through Tommy's mind flashed the assurance, it's hopeless, and he knows it's hopeless. The other looked at him. "Don't take it to heart, lad," he said kindly. "You did your best. You were up against one of the biggest brains of the century, and you came very near success. Remember that." "Thank you, sir. It's awfully decent of you." "I blame myself. I've been blaming myself ever since I heard this other news." Something in his tone attracted Tommy's attention. Hang on a second. Cat fur. A new fear gripped at his heart. "Is there something more, sir?" "I'm afraid so," Mr. Carter said gravely. He stretched out his hand to a sheet on the table. "Tuppence," faltered Tommy. "Read for yourself." The typewritten word danced before his eyes. The description of a green toque, a coat with a handkerchief in the pocket marked PLC. He looked in agonized question at Mr. Carter. The latter replied to it, "Washed up in the Yorkshire coast, near Ebury, I'm afraid. It looks very much like foul play." "My God!" gasped Tommy. "Tuppence! Those devils! I'll never rest until I've got even with them. I'll hunt them down. The pity on Mr. Carter's face stopped him. I know what you feel like, my poor boy, but it's no good. You'll waste your strength uselessly. It may sound harsh, but my advice to you is cut your losses. Time's merciful, you'll forget. Forget tuppence, never! Mr. Carter shook his head. So you think now? Well, it won't bear thinking of, that brave little girl. I'm sorry about the whole business, confoundedly sorry. Tommy came to himself with a start. I'm taking up your time, sir, he said with an effort. There's no need for you to blame yourself. I dare say we were a couple of young fools to take on such a job. You warned us all right. I wish to God I'd been the one to get it in the neck. Goodbye, sir. Back at the Ritz, Tommy packed up his new Back at the Ritz, Tommy packed up his few belongings mechanically, his thoughts far away. He was still bewildered by the introduction of tragedy into his cheerful, commonplace existence. What fun they had had together, he and Tuppence, and now... Oh, he couldn't believe it. It couldn't be true. Tuppence dead. Little Tuppence brimming over with life. It was a dream, a horrible dream, nothing more. They brought him a note, a few kind words of sympathy from Peel Edgerton, who had read the news in the paper. There had been a large headline, ex-VAD feared drowned. The letter ended with the offer of a post on a ranch in Argentine, where Sir James had considerable interests. Kind old beggar, muttered Tommy as he flung it aside. The door opened, and Julius burst in with his usual violence. He held an open newspaper in his hands. Say, what's all this? They seem to have got some fool idea about tuppence. It's true, said Tommy quietly. You mean they've done her in? Tommy nodded. I suppose when they got the treaty, she wasn't any good to them any longer, and they were afraid to let her go. Well, I'm darned, said Julius. Little tuppence, she sure was the pluckiest little girl. But suddenly something seemed to crack in Tommy's brain. He rose to his feet. Oh, get out! You don't really care, damn you! You asked her to marry you in your rotten, cold-blooded way, but I loved her. I'd have given the soul out of my body to save her from harm. I'd have stood by without a word and let her marry you, because you could have given her the sort of time she ought to have had, and I was only a poor devil without a penny to bless himself with. But it wouldn't have been because I didn't care. See here, began Julius temperately. Oh, go to the devil. I can't stand your coming here and talking about little tuppence. Go and look after your cousin. Tuppence is my girl. I've always loved her from the time we played together as kids. We grew up and it was just the same. I shall never forget when I was in hospital and she came in that ridiculous cap and apron. It was like a miracle to see the girl I loved turn up in a nurse's kit. But Julius interrupted him. A nurse's kit? Gee whiz! I must be going to Coney Hatch. I swear I've seen Jane in a nurse's cap, too. And that's plumb impossible. No, by gum, I've got it. It was her I saw talking to Whittington at that nursing home in Bournemouth. She wasn't a patient there. She was a nurse. I dare say, said Tommy angrily. She's probably been in with them from the start. I shouldn't wonder if she stole those papers from Danvers to begin with. I'm darned if she did, shouted Julius. She's my cousin, and as patriotic a girl as ever stepped. I don't care a damn who she is, but get out of here, retorted Tommy, also on the top of his voice. The young men were on the point of coming to blows, but suddenly, with an almost magical abruptness, Julius' anger abated. All right, son, he said quietly. I'm going. I don't blame you for any of what you've been saying. It's mighty lucky you did say it. I've been the most almighty blithering darned idiot that it's possible to be. Calm down. Tommy had made an impatient gesture. I'm going right away now. Going to London and North Western Railway Depot, if you want to know. I don't care a damn where you're going, growled Tommy. As the door closed behind Julius, he returned to his suitcase. That's the lot, he murmured and rang the bell. Take my luggage down. Yes, sir. Going away, sir? I'm going to the devil, said Tommy, regardless of the menial's feelings. That functionary, however, merely replied respectfully, Yes, sir. Shall I call a taxi? Tommy nodded. Where was he going? He hadn't the faintest idea. Beyond a fixed determination to get even with Mr. Brown, he had no plans. He had reread Sir James' letter and shook his head. Tuppence must be avenged. Still, it was kind of the old fellow. Better answer it, I suppose. He went across to the writing table with the usual perversity of bedroom stationery. There were innumerable envelopes and no paper. He rang. No one came. Tommy fumed at the delay. Then he remembered that there was a good supply in Julius's sitting room. The American had announced his immediate departure. There would be no fear of running up against him. Besides, he wouldn't mind if he did. He was beginning to be rather ashamed of the things he had said. Old Julius had taken them jolly well. He'd apologize if he found him there. But the room was deserted. Tommy walked across to the writing table and opened the middle drawer. A photograph, carelessly thrust in face upward, caught his eye. For a moment he stood rooted to the ground. Then he took it out, shut the drawer, walked slowly over to an armchair, and sat down, still staring at the photograph in his hand. What on earth was a photograph of the French girl Annette doing in Julius Hersheimer's writing table? I had a suspicion, actually. But it was a wild, wild suspicion, so I'm like, oh, it couldn't be. "22, in Downing Street." The Prime Minister tapped the desk in front of him with nervous fingers. His face was worn and harassed. He took up his conversation with Mr. Carter at the point it had broken off. "I don't understand," he said. "Do you really mean that things are not so desperate after all?" "So this lad seems to think. Let's have a look at this letter again." Mr. Carter handed it over. It was written in a sprawling boyish hand. "Dear Mr. Carter, something's turned up that has given me a jar. Of course, I may be simply making an awful ass of myself, but I don't think so. If my conclusions are right, that girl at Manchester was just a plant. The whole thing was prearranged, sham packet and all, with the object of making us think the game was up. Therefore, I fancy that we must have been pretty hot on the scent. I think I know who the real Jane Finn is, and I've even got an idea where the papers are. That last's only a guess, of course, but I've got a feeling it'll turn out right. Anyhow, I enclose it in a sealed envelope for what it's worth. I'm going to ask you not to open it until the very last moment. Midnight on the 28th, in fact. You'll understand why in a minute. You see, I've figured it out that those things of Tuppence's are a plant too, and she's no more drowned than I am. The way I reason it is, as a last chance, they'll let Jane Finn escape in the hope that she's been shamming this memory stunt, and that once she thinks she's free, she'll go right away to the cash. Of course, it's an awful risk for them to take, because she knows all about them. They're pretty desperate to get hold of that treaty. But if they know that the papers have been recovered by us, neither of those girls' lives will be worth an hour's purchase. I must try and get hold of Tuppence before Jane escapes. I want a repeat of that telegram that was sent to Tuppence at the Ritz. Sir James Peel Egerton said you would be able to manage that for me. He's frightfully clever. One last thing. Please have that house in Soho watched day and night. Yours, etc., Thomas Beresford." The Prime Minister looked up. "The enclosure?" Mr. Carter smiled dryly. "In the vault of the bank. I am taking no chances." "You don't think," the Prime Minister hesitated a minute, "that it would be better to open it now? Surely we ought to secure the document, that is, provided the young man's guess turns out to be correct at once. We can keep the fact of having done so quite secret." "Can we? I'm not so sure. There are spies all round us. Once it's known, I wouldn't give that. He snapped his fingers. For the life of those two girls. No, the boy trusted me, and I shan't let him down. Well, well, we must leave it at that, then. What's he like, this lad? Outwardly, he's an ordinary, clean-limbed, rather block-headed young Englishman, slow in his mental processes. On the other hand, it's quite impossible to lead him astray through his imagination. He hasn't got any, so he's difficult to deceive. He worries things out slowly, and once he has got hold of something, he doesn't let go. Little lady's quite different. More intuition and less common sense. They make a pretty pair working together, pace and stamina. Seems confident, mused the Prime Minister. Yes, and that's what gives me hope. He's the kind of diffident youth who would have to be very sure before he ventured an opinion at all. A half smile came to the other's lips. Neither of them are boys. They're both full-grown men. A half smile came to the other's lips. And it is this boy who will defeat the master criminal of our time? This boy, as you say, but I sometimes fancy I see a shadow behind. You mean Peel Egerton? Peel Egerton? Said the Prime Minister in astonishment. Yes, I see his hand in this. He struck the open letter. He's there, working in the dark, silently, unobtrusively. I've always felt that if anyone was to run Mr. Brown to earth, Peel Egerton would be the man. I tell you he's on the other side, but doesn't want it known. By the way, I got rather an odd request from him the other day. Yes? He sent me a cutting from some American paper. It referred to a man's body found near the docks in New York about 3 weeks ago. He asked me to collect any information on the subject I could. Well? Carter shrugged his shoulders. I couldn't get much. Young fellow about 35, poorly dressed, face very badly disfigured. He was never identified. And you fancy that the two matters are connected in some way? Somehow I do. I may be wrong, of course. There was a pause. Then Mr. Carter continued. I asked him to come round here. Not that we'll get anything out of him. He doesn't want to tell. His legal instincts are too strong, but there's no doubt he can throw light on one or two obscure points in young Beresford's letter. Ah, here he is. The two men rose to greet the newcomer. A half-whimsical thought flashed across the Premier's mind. My successor, perhaps. I've had a letter from young Beresford, said Mr. Carter, coming to the point at once. You've seen him, I suppose? You suppose wrong, said the lawyer. Oh. Mr. Carter was a little nonplussed. Sir James smiled and stroked his chin. He rang me up, he volunteered. Would you have any objection to telling us exactly what passed between you? Not at all. He thanked me for a certain letter which I had written to him. As a matter of fact, I had offered him a job. Then he reminded me of something I had said to him at Manchester respecting that bogus telegram which lured Miss Cowley away. I asked him if anything untoward had occurred. He said it had, that in a drawer in Mr. Hersheimer's room he had discovered a photograph. The lawyer paused, then continued. I asked him if the photograph bore the name and address of a Californian photographer. He replied, You're on it, sir, it had. Then he went on to tell me something I didn't know. The original of that photograph was the French girl, Annette, who saved his life. What? Exactly. I asked the young man with some curiosity what he had done with the photograph. He replied that he had put it back where he found it. The lawyer paused again. It was good, you know, distinctly good. He can use his brains, that young fellow. I congratulated him. The discovery was a providential one. Of course, from the moment that the girl in Manchester was proved to be a plant, everything was altered. Young Beresford saw that for himself, without my having to tell him. But he felt he couldn't trust his judgment on the subject of Miss Cowley. Did I think she was alive? I told him, duly weighing the evidence, that there was a very decided chance in favor of it. that brought us back to the telegram. Yes? I advised him to apply to you for a copy of the original wire. It had occurred to me as probable that after Mr. Cowley flung it on the floor, certain words might have been erased and altered, with the express intention of settling searchers on a false trail. Carter nodded. He took a sheet from his pocket and read aloud. Come at once. Astley Priors, Gatehouse, Kent. Great developments. Tommy. Very simple, said Sir James, and very ingenious. Just a few words to alter, and the thing was done, and the one important clue they overlooked. What was that? Pageboy's statement that Miss Cowley drove to Charing Cross. They were so sure of themselves that they took it for granted he had made a mistake. Young Beresford is now at Gatehouse, Kent, unless I am much mistaken. Mr. Carter looked at him curiously. I rather wonder you're not there too, P.L. Edgerton. I'm busy on a case. I thought you were on holiday. Oh, yeah, I've not been briefed. Perhaps it would be more correct to say I'm preparing a case. Any more facts about that American chap for me? I'm afraid not. Is it important to find out who he was? Oh, I know who he was, said Sir James easily. I can't prove it yet, but I know. The other two asked no questions. They had an instinct that it would be mere waste of breath. But what I don't understand, said the Prime Minister suddenly, is how that photograph came to be in Mr. Hersheimer's drawer. Perhaps it never left it, suggested the lawyer gently. But the bogus inspector, Inspector Brown. Ah, said Sir James thoughtfully. He rose to his feet. I mustn't keep you, but go on with the affairs of the nation. I must get back to my case. 2 days later, Julius Hersheimer returned from Manchester. A note from Tommy lay on the table. Dear Hersheimer, sorry I lost my temper. In case I don't see you again, goodbye. I've been offered a job in the Argentine, and might as well take it. Yours, Tommy Beresford. A peculiar smile lingered for a moment on Julia's face. He threw the letter into the waste-paper basket. That darn fool, he murmured. I'm going to just adjust this really quickly. Here we go. Now you can see the scratching post. Yeah, right here. Oop. Over here. Sorry. Red Bull, hey, Kickin'. How are you doing? Sorry, I was like, the camera is there. The screen is right here. So I try to see if I can see any movement out of the corner of my eye, but the scroll wasn't long enough quite yet to adjust any of the wording above, so I adjust now, I'm sorry. Thank you for the hydrate. All right. Oh, and I'm sorry it took so long. I finally put the video of, here, let me get Maestro back up. Cat fur, sorry. I finally put the video of part 4 up. And speaking of videos and on YouTube, oh no. Did you have to get any stitches, or is it just a shallow cut and on your knee and thigh? Oof, that sounds fun. Not fun. But yeah, speaking of YouTube videos, the part 1 of The Heroic Slave by Frederick Douglass is apparently my most popular one. I think that a couple of classes are using it. So that's really, really exciting. There are about 38 views on it, and there's one person who replied with the start time when I started reading. Oh, good. No stitches. Nearly. Yeah. Trying to be immortal. I know, right? Yeah, I've never had to get stitches myself. But then again, I'm not like very get out and skin your knees and all of that stuff. Very much, let's sit on the couch and read a bit. Always have been. Oh, let's see, how am I? It's been a very stressful week. It is my first week as being the person in charge, Monday through Wednesday. And I'm not used to being in charge. I don't really like telling people what to do and, being accountable for how everybody's doing. So, whew, but I'm teaching people things so that if I, for some reason, can't make it to work any of those days, or if I'm, sick or anything like that, there will be more people that can do my jobs. Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to, get your cuts and bruises and scrapes and stuff like that. Kind of helps. Maybe build up your resistance or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. But I've always been an indoor kind of person. Although I have done quite a bit of camping. My family does do a lot of camping. So, yeah. But aside from your deep cut, how have you been? How's school been going? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know learning skateboarding is, you're definitely going to have a little bit of scrapes getting, but the more you do it, yeah. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad that you get to hang out with friends in school and stuff like that. Oh yeah, how is D&D going? Have you yet gotten to do that campaign with your family? I don't know if you can see it, but my mug says Meowie Christmas, and I am also wearing a Meowie Christmas shirt because why not? But I am wearing my one of my spring tiaras today. Ah, okay. Yeah, it can be tricky with, people who have a whole bunch of different schedules. Can be. And I understand about the never happy with a creation. I am definitely like that too. I've written a couple of books, but I'm just like, I don't know. And, the more I think on it, it's like there are so many flaws and it's too overwhelming to, fix it and get it right. And I don't have the kind of talent yet to make it what I wish it was. And oh, yeah, I understand about overwhelming. That, creativity wise, I could definitely do a homebrew D&D campaign, but the idea of, because when you're working on a story, it's for the most part pretty linear. I mean, sometimes you do have a couple different storylines, but then with a D&D campaign, it's very much three-dimensional, four-dimensional. You have like, if they choose this option with this, or if they don't take that road that's going to the main part and they take this other one, kind of like, yeah, it's wow. Thank you. My knowledge isn't quite as infinite as one would hope. Most of the knowledge that I have is my sister watches a lot of not really documentaries, but kind of along those lines. She reads a lot of articles and knows a lot of trivia. And of course, I have my trivia books over there. And then I just know a lot about books, but other knowledge has kind of been shoved out of my brain with the knowledge of all the books. So I know a lot about books, not much of anything else. Which actually was a point that came up in the Sherlock Holmes books, where he was like, oh, I don't care if the world is round or if it's flat. It's not important to the case, so I don't know it. I shove all that other information out so that I can fit all of the important information in. Which, it was nice to see somebody clever have that same view. Oh, that is so cool. Yeah, I've heard about those school D&D clubs. That would have been awesome to have when I was growing up. Oh, I remember you mentioning your Yu-Gi-Oh club. Yeah. We didn't really have any clubs like that when I was in school. All right, random fact time. Grab this. Choosing near the front. Smooth brain gang, yeah. All right, here we go. Your 4 random facts for your redeem. When the Lewis chessmen were discovered in 1831, the man who found them ran away, terrified he'd interrupted an assembly of elves. I don't know who the Lewis chessmen are. Dublin is home to Ireland's National Leprechaun Museum. Interesting. All the chickens' eggs produced in the world each year could make an omelet the size of Northern Ireland. And then hummingbirds lay eggs the size of peas. Huh. I've thought about that sometimes, how big a hummingbird's egg would be. Yeah. I love these random facts. And I like how they kind of theme them. If you read them sort of linearly, you can kind of see the theme that they're going. They try to go in a theme. So this one is, going from leprechauns in Ireland to eggs the size of Ireland to the size of eggs. And yeah, it's really interesting to see where they go. I love those fact books. Shall we continue? I think we're about a little halfway through today's story time, and we are almost to the end, there we go, of the book. That's a fun one. I really enjoy these characters. Okay, yeah, oh, well, I hope you have a good night. Thanks so much for dropping in, of course, getting your random fact for the day. If you're going to be around tomorrow, of course, we're going to be starting The Secret at Chimneys tomorrow, another Agatha Christie book, so that'll be fun. I hope you have a good night. Rest well. All right, Hiding Maestro, we will continue. Chapter 23, A Race Against Time. After ringing up Sir James, Tommy's next procedure was to make a call to South Audley Mansions. He found Albert discharging his personal duties, and introduced himself without more ado as a friend of Tuppence's. Albert unbent immediately. "Things have been very quiet here today," he said that wistfully. "Hope the young lady is keeping well, sir." That's just the point, Albert. She's disappeared." "You don't mean it's the crooks that got her?" "They have." "In the underworld?" "No, dash it all, in this world." "Oh, that's expression, sir," said Albert. "At the pictures, the crooks always have a restaurant in the underworld. But do you think they've done her in, sir?" "I hope not. By the way, have you by any chance an aunt, a cousin, grandmother, or any other suitable female relation who might be represented as being likely to kick the bucket?" A delightful grin spread over Albert's countenance. I'm on it, sir. My poor aunt what lives in the country has been mortal bad for a long time, and she's asking for me with her dying breath. Tommy nodded approval. Can you report this in the proper quarter and meet me at Charing Cross in an hour's time? I'll be there, sir. You can count on me. As Tommy had judged, the faithful Albert proved an invaluable ally. The two took up their quarters at the inn in Gatehouse. To Albert fell the task of collecting information. There was no difficulty about it. Astley Priors was the property of a Dr. Adams. The doctor no longer practiced. He retired, the landlord believed, but he took a few private patients. Here the good fellow tapped his forehead knowingly. Balmy ones, you understand. The doctor was a proper figure in the village, subscribed freely to all the local sports. A very pleasant, affable gentleman. Been there long? Oh, matter of 10 years or so. Might be longer. Scientific gentleman he was. Professors and people often come down from town to see him. Anyway, it was a gay house, always visitors. In the face of all this volubility, Tommy felt doubts. Was it possible that this genial, well-known figure could be in reality a dangerous criminal? His life seemed so open and above board. No hint of sinister doings. Suppose it was all a gigantic mistake? Tommy felt a cold chill at the thought. Then he remembered the private patients, balmy ones. He inquired carefully if there was a young lady amongst them, describing tuppence, but nothing much seemed to be known about the patients. They were seldom seen outside the grounds. A guarded description of a net also failed to provoke recognition. Astley Priors was a pleasant red brick edifice surrounded by well-wooded grounds, which effectually shielded the house from observation from the road. On the first evening, Tommy, accompanied by Albert, explored the grounds. Owing to Albert's insistence, they dragged themselves along painfully on their stomachs, thereby producing a great deal more noise than if they had stood upright. In any case, these precautions were totally unnecessary. The grounds, like those of any other private house after nightfall, seemed untenanted. Tommy had imagined a possible fierce watchdog. Albert's fancy ran to a puma or a tame cobra, but they reached a shrubbery near the house quite unmolested. The blinds of the dining room window were open. There was a large company assembled round the table. The port was passing from hand to hand. It seemed a normal, pleasant company. Through the open window, scraps of conversation floated out disjointedly on the night air. It was a heated discussion on county cricket. Again, Tommy felt that cold chill of uncertainty. It seemed impossible to believe that these people were other than they seemed. Had he been fooled once more? The fair-bearded, spectacled gentleman who sat at the head of the table looked singularly honest and normal. Tommy slept badly that night. The following morning, the indefatigable Albert, having cemented an alliance with the greengrocer's boy, took the latter's place and ingratiated himself with the cook at Malthouse. He returned with the information that she was undoubtedly one of the crooks, but Tommy mistrusted the vividness of his imagination. Questions, he could adduce nothing in support of this statement, except his own opinion that she wasn't the usual kind. You could see that at a glance. The substitution being repeated, much to the pecuniary advantage of the real greengrocer's boy. On the following day, Albert brought back the first piece of hopeful news. There was a French young lady staying in the house. Tommy put his doubts aside. Here was confirmation of his theory. But time pressed. Today was the 27th. The 29th was the much-talked-of Labor Day, about which all sorts of rumors were running riot. Newspapers were getting agitated. Sensational hints of a labor coup d'etat were freely reported. The government said nothing. It knew and was prepared. There were rumors of dissension among the labor leaders. They were not of one mind. The more far-seeing among them realized that what they proposed might well be a death blow to the England that at heart they loved. They shrank from the starvation and misery of general strike would entail, and were willing to meet the government halfway. But behind them were subtle, insistent forces at work, urging the memories of old wrongs, deprecating the weakness of half-and-half measures, fomenting misunderstandings. Tommy felt that, thanks to Mr. Carter, he understood the position fairly accurately. With the fatal document in the hands of Mr. Brown, public opinion would swing to the side of the labor extremists and revolutionists. Failing that, the battle was an even chance. The government was a loyal army and police force behind them the government with a loyal army and police force behind them might win, but at a cost of great suffering. But Tommy nourished another and a preposterous dream. With Mr. Brown unmasked and captured, he believed, rightly or wrongly, that the whole organization would crumble ignominiously and instantaneously. The strange permeating influence of the unseen chief held it together. Without him, Tommy believed an instant panic would set in, and the honest man left to themselves, an 11th-hour reconciliation would be possible. "This is a one-man show," said Tommy to himself. "The thing to do is to get hold of the sun." It was partly in furtherance of this ambitious design that he had requested Mr. Carter not to open the sealed envelope. The draft treaty was Tommy's bait. Every now and then he was aghast at his own presumption. How dared he think that he had discovered what so many wiser and cleverer men had overlooked? Nevertheless, he stuck tenaciously to his idea. That evening he and Albert once more penetrated the grounds of Astley Priors. Tommy's ambition was somehow or other to gain admission to the house itself. As they approached cautiously, Tommy gave a sudden gasp. On the second-floor window, someone standing between the window and the light in the room threw a silhouette on the blind. It was one Tommy would have recognized anywhere. Tuppence was in that house. He clutched Albert by the shoulder. "Stay here. When I begin to sing, watch that window." He retreated hastily to a position on the main drive, and began in a deep roar, coupled with an unsteady gait, the following ditty. "I am a soldier, a jolly British soldier. You can see that I'm a soldier by my feet." It had been a favorite at the gramophone in Tuppence's hospital days. He did not doubt but that she would recognize it and draw her own conclusions. Tommy had not a note of music in his voice, but his lungs were excellent. The noise he produced was terrific. Presently, an unimpeachable butler, accompanied by an equally unimpeachable footman, issued from the front door. The butler remonstrated with him. Tommy continued to sing, addressing the butler affectionately as "dear old Whiskers." The footman took him by one arm, the butler by the other. They ran him down the drive and neatly out of the gate. The butler threatened him with the police if he intruded again. It was beautifully done, soberly and with perfect decorum. Anyone would have sworn that the butler was a real butler, the footman a real footman, only, as it happened, the butler was Whittington. Tommy retired to the inn and waited for Albert's return. At last, that worthy made his appearance. "Well," Tommy cried eagerly, "it's all right. While they was running of you out, the window opened and something was chucked out." He handed a scrap of paper to Tommy. It was wrapped around a letter weight. On the paper were scrawled 3 words: "Tomorrow, same time." "Good egg!" cried Tommy. "We're getting going." "I wrote a message on a piece of paper, wrapped it round a stone, and chucked it through the window," continued Albert breathlessly. Tommy groaned. Your zeal will be the undoing of us, Albert. What did you say? Said we was a-staying at the inn, where she could get away to come in there and croak like a frog. She'll know that's you, said Tommy with a sigh of relief. Your imagination runs away with you, you know, Albert. Why, you wouldn't recognize a frog croaking if you heard it. Albert looked rather crestfallen. Cheer up, said Tommy. No harm done. That butler's an old friend of mine. I bet he knew who I was, though he didn't let on. That's not their game to show suspicion. That's why we've found it fairly plain sailing. They don't want to discourage me altogether. On the other hand, they don't want to make it too easy. I'm a pawn in their game, Albert. That's what I am. You see, if the spider lets the fly walk out too easily, the fly might suspect it was a put-up job. Hence the usefulness of that promising youth, Mr. T. Beresford, who's blundered in just at the right moment for them. But later, Mr. T. Beresford had better look out. Tommy retired for the night in a state of some elation. He had elaborated a careful plan for the following evening. He felt sure that the inhabitants of Astley Priors would not interfere with him up to a certain point. It was after that Tommy proposed to give him a surprise. About 12 o'clock, however, his calm was rudely shaken. He was told that someone was demanding him in the bar. The applicant proved to be a rude-looking carter, well coated with mud. "Well, my good fellow, what is it?" said Tommy. "Might this be for you, sir?" The carter held out a very dirty folded note, on the outside of which was written, "Take this to the gentleman at the inn near Astley Priors. He will give you 10 shillings. The handwriting was tuppence's. Tommy appreciated her quick-wittedness, and realizing that he might be standing at the inn under an assuming name, he snatched at it. "That's all right." The man withheld it. "What about my 10 shillings? Tommy hastily produced 10-shilling note, and the man relinquished his find. Tommy unfastened it. "Dear Tommy, I know it was you last night. Don't go this evening. They'll be lying in wait for you. They're taking us away this morning. I heard something about Wales. Holyhead, I think. I'll drop this on the road if I get a chance. Annette told me how you'd escaped. Buck up. Yours, 2 pence. Tommy raised a shout for Albert before he had even finished pursuing this characteristic epistle. "Pack my bag, we're off." "Yes, sir." The boots of Albert could be heard racing upstairs. Holyhead. Did that mean that, after all? Tommy was puzzled. He read on slowly. The boots of Albert continued to be active on the floor above. Suddenly, a second shout came from below. "Albert, I'm a damned fool. Unpack that bag." "Yes, sir." Tommy smoothed out the note thoughtfully. "You damned fool," he said softly. "But so's someone else, and at last I know who it is." Chapter 24. Julius Takes a Hand. In this sweet claridge, Cramenin reclined on a couch and dictated to his secretary in sibilant Russian. Presently, the telephone at the secretary's elbow purred, and he took up the receiver, spoke for a minute or two, then turned to his employer. "Someone below is asking for you." "Who is it?" "He gives the name of Mr. Julius P. Hersheimer." "Hersheimer," repeated Cramenin thoughtfully. "I have heard that name before. His father was one of the steel kings of America," explained the secretary, whose business it was to know everything. "This young man must be a millionaire several times over." The other's eyes narrowed appreciatively. "You'd better go down and see him, Ivan. Get out what he wants." The secretary obeyed, closing the door noiselessly behind him. In a few minutes he returned. "He declines to state his business, as it is entirely private and personal, and that he must see you." "A millionaire several times over," murmured Cramenin. "Bring him up, my dear Ivan." The secretary left the room once more and returned escorting Julius. "Monsieur Cramenin?" said the latter abruptly. The Russian, studying him attentively with his pale, venomous eyes, bowed. Pleased to meet you, sir, said the American. I've got some very important business I'd like to talk over with you if I can see you alone. He looked pointedly at the other. My secretary, Monsieur Grieber, from whom I have no secrets. That may be so, but I have, said Julius dryly. So I'd be obliged if you'd let him tell him to scoot. Ivan, said the Russian softly, perhaps you would not mind retiring into the next room. The next room won't do, interrupted Julius. I know these ducal suites, and I want this one plumb empty, except for you and me. Send him round to the store to buy a pen'orth of peanuts. Though not particularly enjoying the American's free and easy manner of speech, Creminen was devoured by curiosity. Will your business take long to state? Might be an all-night job if you caught on. Very good, Ivan. I shall not require you again this evening. Go to the theatre. Take the night off. Thank you, Your Excellency. The secretary bowed and departed. Julius stood at the door, watching his retreat. Finally, with a satisfied sigh, he closed it and came back to his position in the center of the room. Now, Mr. Hersheimer, perhaps you will be so kind as to come to the point. I guess that won't take a minute, drawled Julius. Then, with an abrupt change of manner, hands up, or I shoot! For a moment, Creminen stared blindly into the big automatic. Then, with almost comical haste, he flung up his hands above his head. In that instant, Julius had taken his measure. The man he had to deal with was an abject physical coward. The rest would be easy. This is an outrage, cried the Russian in a high, hysterical voice. An outrage! Do you mean to kill me? Not if you keep your voice down. Go edging sideways toward that bell. That's better. What do you do? What do you want? Do nothing rashly. Remember, my life is of the utmost value to my country. I may have been maligned. I reckon, said Julius, the man who let daylight into you would be doing humanity a good turn. But you needn't worry any. I'm not proposing to kill you on this trip. That is, if you're reasonable. The Russian quailed before the stern menace in the other's eyes. He passed his tongue over his dry lips. What do you want? Money? No, I want Jane Finn. Jane Finn? I never heard of her. You're a darned liar. You know perfectly who I mean. I tell you I've never heard of the girl. And I tell you, retorted Julius, that little Willie here is just hopping mad to go off. The Russian wilted visibly. You wouldn't dare. Oh, yes, I would, son. Creminen must have recognized something in the voice that carried conviction, for he said sullenly, Well, granted I do know who you mean. What of it? You will tell me now, right now, where she is to be found. Creminen shook his head. I daren't. Why not? I daren't. You ask an impossibility. Afraid, eh? Of whom? Mr. Brown? Oh, that tickles you up. There is such a person, then? I doubted it. And the mere mention of him scares you stiff. I've seen him, said the Russian slowly. Spoken to him face to face. I did not know it until afterwards. He was one of the crowd. I should not know him again. Who is he really? I do not know, but I know this. He is a man to fear. He'll never know, said Julius. He knows everything, and his vengeance is swift. Even I, Creminen, would not be exempt. Then you won't do as I ask you? You ask an impossibility. Sure, that's a pity for you, said Julius cheerfully. But the world in general will benefit. He raised the revolver. Stop! Shrieked the Russian. You cannot mean to shoot me. Of course I do. I've always heard you revolutionists held life cheap, but it seems there's a difference when it's your own life in question. I gave you just one chance of saving your dirty skin, and that you wouldn't take. They would kill me. Well, said Julius pleasantly, it's up to you. But I'll just say this.
Little Willie here is a dead cert, and if I was you, I'd take a sporting chance with Mr. Brown." "You will hang if you shoot me," muttered the Russian irresolutely. "No, stranger, that's where you're wrong. You forget the dollars. A big crowd of solicitors will get busy, and they'll get some highbrow doctors on the job, and at the end of it, all will be, all, oh goodness, and at the end of it, all will be that they'll say oh goodness, and at the end of it all, there we go. And at the end of it all will be that they'll say my brain was unhinged. I shall spend a few months in a quiet sanatorium, my mental health will improve, the doctors will declare me sane again, and all will end happily for little Julius. I guess I can't bear a few months' retirement in order to rid the world of you, but don't you kid yourself, I'll hang for it." The Russian believed him. Corrupt himself, he believed implicitly in the power of money. He had read of American murder trials, running much on the lines indicated by Julius. He had bought and sold justice himself. This virile young American with a significant drawling voice had the whip hand of him. "I'm going to count 5, continued Julius, "and I guess if you let me get past 4, you needn't worry any about Mr. Brown. Maybe he'll send some flowers to the funeral, but you won't smell them. Are you ready? I'll begin. 1, 2, 3, 4, the Russian interrupted with a shriek. "Do not shoot! I will do as you wish." Julius lowered the revolver. "I thought you'd hear sense. Where's the girl?" "At Gatehouse in Kent. Astley Priors, the place is called." "Is she a prisoner there?" "She's not allowed to leave the house, so it's safe enough, really. The little fool has lost her memory, curse her." "That's been annoying for you and your friends, I reckon. What about the other girl, the one who you decoyed away over a week ago?" "She's there, too," said the Russian sullenly. "That's good," said Julius. "Isn't it all panning out beautifully, and a lovely night for the run?" "What run?" demanded Creminen with a stare. "Down to Gatehouse, sure. I hope you're fond of motoring." "What do you mean? I refuse to go." "Now, don't get mad. You must see I'm not such a kid as to leave you here. You'd ring up your friends on that telephone first thing." "Ah!" he observed the fall of the other's face. "You see? You got it all fixed. No, sir, you're coming along with me. This your bedroom next door here? Walk right in. Little Willie and I will come behind. Put on a thick coat, that's right, Verline. And you a socialist. Now we're ready. We walk down the stairs and out through the hall to where my car's waiting. And don't you forget, I've got you covered every inch of the way. I can shoot just as well through my coat pocket. One word, or a glance even, at one of those liveried menials, and there'll sure be a strange face in the sulphur and brimstone works." Together they descended the stairs and passed out to the waiting car. The Russian was shaking with rage. The hotel servants surrounded him. A cry hovered on his lips, but at the last minute his nerves failed him. The American was a man of his word. When they reached the car, Julius breathed a sigh of relief. The danger zone was past. Fear had successfully hypnotized the man by his side. "Get in," he ordered. Then as he caught the other's sidelong glance, "No, the chauffeur won't help you any. Naval man. Was on a submarine in Russia when the revolution broke out. A brother of his was murdered by your people." "George!" "Yes, sir." The chauffeur turned his head. "This gentleman is a Russian Bolshevik. We don't want to shoot him, but it may be necessary. You understand?" "Perfectly, sir." "I want to go to Gatehouse in Kent. Know the road at all?" "Yes, sir. It will be about an hour and a half's run." "Make it an hour. I'm in a hurry." "I'll do my best, sir." The car shot forward through the traffic. Julius ensconced himself comfortably by the side of his victim. He kept his hand in the pocket of his coat, but his manner was urbane to the last degree. There was a man I shot once in Arizona, he began cheerfully. At the end of the hour's run, the unfortunate Cramenon was more dead than alive. In succession to the anecdote of the Arizona man, there had been a tough from Frisco, and an episode in the Rockies. Julia's narrative style, if not strictly accurate, was picturesque. Slowing down, the chauffeur called over his shoulder that they were just coming into Gatehouse. Julius bade the Russian direct them. His plan was to drive straight up to the house. There, Cramenon was to ask for the two girls. Julius explained to him that little Willie would not be tolerant of failure. Cramenon, by this time, was as putty in the other's hand. The terrific pace they had come had still further unmanned him. He had given himself up for dead at every corner. The car swept up the drive and stopped before the porch. The chauffeur looked round for orders. Turn the car first, George, then ring the bell, and get back to your place. Keep the engine going, and be ready to shoot like hell when I give the word. Oh, scoot like hell. Very good, sir. The front door was opened by the butler. Cramenon felt the muzzle of the revolver pressed against his ribs. Now, hissed Julius, and be careful. The Russian beckoned. His lips were white, and his voice was not very steady. It's I, Cramenon. Bring down the girl at once. There is no time to lose. Whittington had come down the steps. He uttered an exclamation of astonishment at seeing the other. You! What's up? Surely you know the plan. Cramenon interrupted him, using words that have created many unnecessary panics. We have been betrayed. Plans must be abandoned. We must save our own skins. The girl, and at once. It is our only chance. Whittington hesitated, but for hardly a moment. You have orders from him. Naturally, should I be here otherwise? Hurry, there is no time to be lost. The other little fool had better come too. Whittington turned and ran back into the house. The agonizing minutes went by. Then 2 figures hastily huddled in cloaks appeared on the steps and were hustled into the car. The smaller of the two was inclined to resist and Whittington shoved her in unceremoniously. Julius leaned forward, and doing so, the light from the open door lit up his face. Another man on the step behind Whittington gave a startled exclamation. Concealment was at an end. Get a move on, George, shouted Julius. The chauffeur slipped in his clutch. With a bound, the car started. The man on the steps uttered an oath. His hand went to his pocket. There was a flash and a report. The bullet just missed the taller girl by an inch. Get down, Jane, cried Julius, flat on the bottom of the car. He thrust her sharply forward. Then, standing up, he took careful aim and fired. Have you hit him? Cried Tuppence eagerly. Sure, said Julius. He isn't killed, though. Skunks like that take a lot of killing. Are you all right, Tuppence? Of course I am. Where's Tommy? And who's this? She indicated the shivering Cramenon. Tommy's making tracks for the Argentine. I guess he thought you'd turned up your toes. Steady through the gate, George. That's right. It'll take him at least 5 minutes to get busy after us. They'll use the telephone, I guess, so look out for snares ahead. And don't take the direct route. Who's this, did you say, Tuppence? Let me present Monsieur Cramenon. I persuaded him to come on the trip for his health. The Russian remained mute, still livid with terror. But what made them let us go? Demanded Tuppence suspiciously. I reckon Monsieur Cramenon here asked them so prettily that they just couldn't refuse. This was too much for the Russian. He burst out vehemently. Curse you! Curse you! They know now that I betrayed them. My life won't be safe for an hour in this country. That's so, assented Julius. I'd advise you to make tracks for Russia right away. Let me go, then, cried the other. I have done what you asked. Why do you still keep me with you? Not for the pleasure of your company. I guess you can get right off now if you want to. I thought you'd rather I tooled you back to London. You may never reach London, snarled the other. Let me go, here and now. Sure thing. Pull up, George. The gentleman's not making the return trip. If I ever come to Russia, Monsieur Kramenin, I shall expect a rousing welcome. But before Julius had finished his speech, and before the car had finally halted, the Russian had swung himself out and disappeared into the night. Just a mite impatient to leave us, commented Julius as the car gathered way again. And no idea of saying goodbye politely to the ladies. Say, Jane, you can get up on the seat now. For the first time, the girl spoke. How did you persuade him? She asked. Julius tapped the revolver. Little Willie here takes the credit. Splendid! Cried the girl. The color surged into her face. Her eyes looked admiringly at Julius. Annette and I didn't know what was going to happen to us, said Tuppence. Old Whittington hurried us off. We thought it was lambs to the slaughter. Annette, said Julius. Is that what you call her? His mind seemed to be trying to adjust itself to a new idea. What's her name? Said Tuppence, opening her eyes very wide. Shucks, reported Julius. She may think it's her name because her memory's gone, poor kid, but it's the one real and original Jane Finn we've got here. What? Cried Tuppence. But she was interrupted. With an angry spurt, a bullet embedded itself in the upholstery of the car just behind her head. Down with you, cried Julius. It's an ambush. These guys have got busy pretty quickly. Push her a bit, George. The car fairly leapt forward. 3 more shots rang out, but went happily wide. Julius, upright, leant over the back of the car. Nothing to shoot at, he announced gloomily. But I guess there'll be another little picnic soon. Ah! He raised his hand to his cheek. You are hurt? Said Annette quickly. Oh, it's only a scratch. The girl sprang to her feet. Let me out, I say. Stop the car. It is me they're after. I'm the one they want. You should not lose your lives because of me. Let me go. She was fumbling with the fastening of the door. Julius took her by both arms and looked at her. She had spoken with no trace of foreign accent. Sit down, kid, he said gently. I guess there's nothing wrong with your memory. Been fooling them all the time, eh? The girl looked at him, nodded, and then suddenly burst into tears. Julius patted her on the shoulder. There. Just you sit tight. We're not going to let you quit. Through her sobs, the girl said indistinctly, You're from home. I can tell by your voice. It makes me homesick. Sure, I'm from home. I'm your cousin, Julius Hersheimer. I came over to Europe to propose to find on purpose to find you, and a pretty dance you've led me. The car slackened speed. George spoke over his shoulder. Crossroads here, sir. I'm not sure of the way. The car slowed down till it hardly moved. As it did so, a figure climbed suddenly over the back and plunged head first into the midst of them. Sorry, said Tommy, extricating himself. A mass of confused exclamations greeted him. He replied to them severely. Was in the bushes by the drive. Hung on behind. Couldn't let you know before at the pace you were going. It was all I could do to hang on. Now then, you girls, get out. Get out? Yes, there's a station up that road. Train due in 3 minutes. You'll catch it if you hurry. What the devil are you driving at? Demanded Julius. Do you think you can fool them by leaving the car? You and I aren't going to leave the car, only the girls. You're crazed, Beresford. Stark raving mad. You can't let those girls go off alone. It'll be the end of it if you do. Tommy turned to Tuppence. Get out at once, Tuppence. Take her with you, and do just as I say. No one will do you any harm. You're safe. Take the train to London. Go straight to Sir James Peel Edgerton. Mr. Carter lives out of town. But you'll be safe with him. Darn you, cried Julius. You're mad. Jane, you stay where you are. With a sudden swift movement, Tommy snatched the revolver from Julia's hands and leveled it at him. Now will you believe I'm in earnest? Get out, both of you, and do as I say, or I'll shoot. Tuppence sprang out, dragging the unwilling Jane after her. Come on, it's all right. If Tommy's sure, he's sure. Be quick. We'll miss the train." They started running. Julia's pent-up rage burst forth. "What the hell?" Tommy interrupted him. "Dry up. I want a few words with you, Mr. Julius Hersheimer." I am intrigued. Chapter 25. Jane's Story. Her arm through Jane's, dragging her along, Tuppence reached the station. Her quick ears caught the sound of the approaching train. "Hurry up," she panted, "or we'll miss it." They arrived on the platform just as the train came to a standstill. Tuppence opened the door of the empty first-class compartment, and the two girls sank down breathless on the padded seats. A man looked in, then passed on to the next carriage. Jane started nervously, her eyes dilated with terror. She looked questioningly at Tuppence. "Is he one of them, do you think?" she breathed. Tuppence shook her head. No, it's all right." She took Jane's hand in hers. "Tommy wouldn't have told us to do this unless he was sure we'd be all right." "But he doesn't know them as I do," the girl shivered. "You can't understand. 5 years, 5 long years. Sometimes I thought I should go mad." "Never mind, it's all over." "Is it?" The train was moving now, speeding through the night at a gradually increasing rate. Suddenly Jane Finn started up. "What was that? I thought I saw a face looking in through the window." "No, there's nothing. See?" Tuppence went to the window and lifting the strap, let the pane down. "You sure?" "Quite sure." The other seemed to feel some excuse was necessary. "I guess I'm acting like a frightened rabbit, but I can't help it. If they caught me now, they'd—" Her eyes opened wide, staring. "Don't!" implored Tuppence. "Lie back and don't think. You can be quite sure that Tommy wouldn't have said it was safe if it wasn't." "My cousin didn't think so. He didn't want us to do this." "No?" said Tuppence, rather embarrassed. "What are you thinking of?" said Jane sharply. "Why? Your voice was so queer." "I was thinking of something," confessed Tuppence. "But I don't want to tell you. Not now. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. It's just an idea that came into my head a long time ago. Tommy's got it, too. I am almost sure he has. But don't you worry. There'll be time enough for that later. And it mayn't be so at all. Do what I tell you. Lie back and don't think of anything." "I'll try." The long lashes drooped over the hazel eyes. Tuppence, for her part, sat bolt upright, much in her attitude for a watchful terrier on guard. In spite of herself, she was nervous. Her eyes flashed continually from one window to the other. She noted the exact position of the communication cord. What was it that she feared? She would have been hard put to it to say. But in her own mind she was far from feeling the confidence displayed in her words. Not that she disbelieved in Tommy, but occasionally she was shaken with doubts as to whether anyone so simple and honest as he could ever be matched for the fiendish subtlety of the arch-criminal. If they once reached Sir Peel Egerton in safety, all would be well. But would they reach him? Would not the silent forces of Mr. Brown already be assembling against them? Even that last picture of Tommy, revolver in hand, failed to comfort her. By now he might be overpowered, borne down by the sheer force of numbers. Tuppence mapped out her plan of campaign. As the train at length drew slowly into Charing Cross, Jane Finn sat up with a start. "Have we arrived? I never thought we should." "Oh, I thought we'd get to London all right. If there's going to be any fun now, we'll all begin." "Quick, get out. Let's nip into a taxi." In another minute they were passing the barrier, had paid the necessary fares, and were stepping into a taxi. "King's Cross," directed Tuppence. Then she gave a jump. A man looked in at the window just as they started. She was almost certain it was the same man who had got into the carriage next to them. She had a horrible feeling of being slowly hemmed in on every side. "You see," she explained to Jane, "if they think we're going to Sir James, this will put them off the scent. Now they'll imagine we're going to Mr. Carter. This country place is north of London somewhere." Crossing Holborn, there was a block, and the taxi was held up. This was what Tuppence had been waiting for. "Quick," she whispered. "Open the right-hand door." The two girls stepped out into the traffic. 2 minutes later, they were seated in another taxi. "Oh, hi, Ollie. How are you doing?" "I'm doing all right, yeah. It's been a stressful week, but enjoying my weekend. How are you doing?" I'll put up Maestro since we're chatting a little bit. Glad you could join us. We've still got a bit of a ways left to go. We're this far to the end. So maybe about another hour or so. Wonderful. Glad to hear it. This is, even though this is part 5, I think I forgot to change what, I think it says part 4. This is part 5, I'm sorry. But all of the previous story times are on my YouTube. Let me put that up there for you. So if you wanted to get caught up, you can. So I have all of my videos on there. They are in playlists. They are in playlists, but I have to add number 4 on there. So I'm going to continue, and you can chat with Corel, and then I will chat some more. Thank you very much for putting up the socials. And if you join us on Discord, we strongly support cat pictures and dog pictures, any kind of pet pictures. So I'm going to put up... Oh, okay. Happy to talk to you too. I will chat a little bit more at the end of chapters. I like to keep the story time going as fluidly as possible, but don't worry, I will reply at the end of the chapter. Oh, wonderful. Then you're in perfect company. I love books too. I actually work at an independent bookstore in America. And so you could say literally my life is books because, you know, professionally I sell books, and, you know, on my time off I read to myself and also to you guys, and also my cat. I actually it's nice to meet you too. Yeah. I've been reading aloud for about 25 years. I started with my cats, and I did it because I wasn't very good at it, but I loved doing it, and so I was just like, I'm going to practice on my cats, and then it became a thing. I used to volunteer at libraries and do it, and then sometimes, before, of course, quarantine, we would have story times at the bookstore. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and continue. So, when you see this guy, Maestro, on the screen, that means that we are chatting, and when he's hiding, that means that we are doing story time. Oh, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the follow. And I hope you enjoy it. There are many, many hours of story time up on the YouTube. So you can just, you know, choose a playlist and go. They're all in order, so you don't have to worry about finding the next video. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and continue, and then we'll chat some more later. So let's hide Maestro. Here we go. "Quick," she whispered. "Open the right-hand door." The two girls stepped out into the traffic. 2 minutes later, they were seated in another taxi and were retracing their steps, this time direct to Carlton House Terrace. "There," said Tuppence with great satisfaction. "Ooh, this ought to do them. I can't help thinking that I'm really rather clever. How that other taxi man will swear. But I took his number, and I'll send him a postal order tomorrow so that he won't lose by it if he happens to be genuine. What's this thing swerving? Oh!" There was a grinding noise and a bump. Another taxi had collided with them. In a flash, Tuppence was out on the pavement. A policeman was approaching. Before they arrived, Tuppence had handed the driver 5 shillings, and she and Jane had immersed themselves in the crowd. It's only a step or two now, said Tuppence breathlessly. The accident had taken place in Trafalgar Square. Do you think the collision was an accident or done deliberately? I don't know. It might have been either. Hand in hand, the two girls hurried along. It may be my fancy, said Tuppence suddenly, but I feel as though there was someone behind us. Hurry, murmured the other. Oh, hurry! They were now in the corner of Carlton House Terrace, and their spirits lightened. Suddenly, a large and apparently intoxicated man barred their way. Good evening, ladies, he hiccuped. Whither away so fast? Let us pass, please, said Tuppence imperiously. Just a word with your pretty faces here. He stretched out an unsteady hand and clutched Jane by the shoulder. Tuppence heard other footsteps behind. She did not pause to ascertain whether they were friends or foes. Lowering her head, she repeated a maneuver of childish days and butted their aggressor full in the capacious middle. The success of these unsportsmanlike tactics was immediate. The man sat down abruptly on the pavement. Tuppence and Jane took to their heels. The house they sought was some way down. Other footsteps echoed behind them. Their breath was coming in choking gasps as they reached Sir James's door. Tuppence seized the bell and Jane the knocker. The man who had stopped them reached the foot of the steps. For a moment he hesitated, and as he did so, the door opened. They fell into the hall together. Sir James came forward from the library door. Hello, what's this? He stepped forward and put his arm round Jane as she swayed uncertainly. He half carried her into the library and laid her on the leather couch. From a tantalus on the table, he poured out a few drops of brandy and forced her to drink them. With a sigh, she sat up, her eyes still wild and frightened. It's all right, don't be afraid, my child, you're quite safe. Her breath came more normally, and the color was returning to her cheeks. Sir James looked at Tuppence quizzically. So you're not dead, Miss Tuppence, any more than that Tommy boy of yours was. The young adventurers take a lot of killing, boasted Tuppence. So it seems, said Sir James dryly. Am I right in thinking that the joint venture has ended in success, and that this, he turned to the girl on the couch, is Miss Jane Finn? Jane sat up. Yes, she said quietly, I'm Jane Finn. I have a lot to tell you. When you're stronger. No, now! Her voice rose a little. I shall feel safer when I've told everything. As you please, said the lawyer. He sat down in one of the big armchairs facing the couch. In a low voice, Jane began her story. I came over on the Lusitania to take up a post in Paris. I was fearfully keen about the war, and just dying to help somehow or other. I had been studying French, and my teacher said they were wanting help in a hospital in Paris, so I wrote and offered my services, and they were accepted. I hadn't got any folks of my own, so it made it easy to arrange things. When the Lusitania was torpedoed, a man came up to me. I'd noticed him more than once, and I'd figured it out in my own mind that he was afraid of somebody or something. He asked me if I was patriotic American, and told me that he was carrying papers which was just life or death to the Allies. He asked me to take charge of them. I was to watch for an advertisement in the Times. If it didn't appear, I was to take them to the American ambassador. Most of what follows seems like a nightmare still. I see it in my dreams sometimes. I hurry over that part. Mr. Danvers had told me to watch out. He might have been shadowed from New York, but he didn't think so. At first I had no suspicions, but on the boat to Holyhead I began to get uneasy. There was one woman who had been very keen to look after me and chum up with me generally, Mrs. Vandemeyer. At first I had been only grateful to her for being so kind to me, but all the time I felt that there was something about her I didn't like. And on the Irish boat I saw her talking to some queer-looking men, and from the way they looked, I saw that they were talking about me. Oh, okay. Well, so far I haven't noticed anything wrong, so you're doing well, as far as I can see. I remembered that she'd been quite near me on the Lusitania when Mrs. Danvers gave me the packet, Mr. Danvers.
Okay.
Before that, she'd tried to talk to him once or twice. I began to get scared, but I didn't quite see what to do. I had a wild idea of stopping at Holyhead and not going on to London that day, but I soon saw that would be plumb foolishness. The only thing was to act as though I'd noticed nothing and hope for the best. I couldn't see how they could get me if I was on my guard. One thing I'd done already was as a precaution, ripped open the oilskin packet and substituted blank paper, and then sewn it up again, so if anyone did manage to rob me of it, it wouldn't matter. What to do with the real thing worried me to no end. Finally, I opened it out flat. There were only 2 sheets, and laid it between 2 of the advertisement pages of a magazine. I stuck the 2 pages together round the edge with some gum off an envelope. I carried the magazine carelessly stuffed into the pocket of my ulster. At Holyhead, I tried to get into a carriage with people that looked all right, but in a queer way, there seemed always to be a crowd round me, shoving and pushing me just the way I didn't want to go. There was something uncanny and frightening about it. In the end, I found myself in a carriage with Mrs. Vandermeyer after all. I went out into the corridor, but all the other carriages were full, so I had to go back and sit down. I consoled myself with the thought that there were other people in the carriage. There was quite a nice-looking man and his wife sitting just opposite, so I felt almost happy about it until we just outside London. I had leaned back and closed my eyes. I guess they thought I was asleep, but my eyes weren't quite shut, and suddenly I saw the nice-looking man get something out of his bag and hand it to Mrs. Vandermeyer, and as he did so, he winked. I can't tell you how that wink sort of froze me through and through. My only thought was to get out of the corridor as quick as I ever could. I got up, trying to look natural and easy. Perhaps they saw something, I don't know. But suddenly Mrs. Vandermeyer said, "Now," and flung something over my mouth and nose as I tried to scream. At the next moment I felt a terrific blow on the back of my head. She shuddered. Sir James murmured something sympathetically. In a minute she resumed. I don't know how long it was before I got back to consciousness. I felt very ill and sick. I was lying on a dirty bed. There was a screen around it, but I could hear 2 people talking in the room. Mrs. Vandermeyer was one of them. I tried to listen, but at first I couldn't take much in. When at last I did begin to grasp what was going on, I was just terrified. I wonder I didn't scream right out there and then. They had found the papers. They got the oilskin packet with the blanks, and they were just mad. They didn't know whether I'd changed the papers or whether Danver had been carrying a dummy message while the real one was sent another way. They spoke of, she closed her eyes, torturing me to find out. I'd never known what fear, really sickening fear, was before. Once they came to look at me, I shut my eyes and pretended to be still unconscious, but I was afraid they'd hear the beating of my heart. However, they went away. I began thinking madly. What could I do? I knew I wouldn't be able to stand up against torture very long. Suddenly something put the thought of loss of memory into my head. The subject had always interested me, and I read an awful lot about it. I had the whole thing at my fingertips. If only I could succeed in carrying the bluff through, it might save me. I said a prayer and drew a long breath. Then I opened my eyes and started babbling in French. Mrs. Vandermeyer came round the screen at once. Her face was so wicked I nearly died, but I smiled up at her doubtfully and asked her in French where I was. It puzzled her, I could see. She called the man she had been talking to. He stood by the screen with his face in shadow. He spoke to me in French. His voice was very ordinary and quiet, but somehow, I don't know why, he scared me, but I went on playing my part. I asked again where I was, and then went on that there was something I must remember. Only for the moment it was all gone. I worked myself up to be more and more distressed. He asked me my name. I said I didn't know, that I couldn't remember anything at all. Suddenly he caught my wrist and began twisting it. The pain was awful. I screamed. He went on. I screamed and screamed, but I managed to shriek out things in French. I don't know how long I could have gone on, but luckily I fainted. The last thing I heard was his voice saying, "It's not bluff. Anyway, a kid of her age wouldn't know enough." I guess he forgot American girls are older for their age than English ones, and take more interest in scientific subjects. When I came to, Mrs. Vandermeyer was sweet as honey to me. She'd had her orders, I guess. She spoke to me in French, told me I'd had a shock and been very ill. I should be better soon. I pretended to be dazed, murmured something about the doctor having hurt my wrist. She looked relieved when I said that. By and by, she went out of the room altogether. I was suspicious still, and lay quite quiet for some time. In the end, however, I got up and walked around the room examining it. I thought that even if someone was watching me from somewhere, it would seem natural enough under the circumstances. It was a squalid, dirty place. There were no windows, which seemed queer. I guessed the door would be locked, but I didn't try it. There were some battered old pictures on the walls representing scenes from Faust. Jane's two listeners gave a simultaneous, "Ah!" The girl nodded. Yes, it was the place in Soho where Mr. Beresford was imprisoned. Of course, at the time I didn't even know if I was in London. One thing was worrying me dreadfully, but my heart gave a great throb of relief when I saw my ulster lying carelessly over the back of a chair, and the magazine was still rolled up in the pocket. If only I could be certain that I was not being overlooked. I looked carefully round the walls. There didn't seem to be a peephole of any kind. Nevertheless, I felt kind of sure there must be. All of a sudden, I sat down on the edge of the table and put my face in my hands, sobbing out a "Mon Dieu, mon Dieu." I've got very sharp ears. I distinctly heard the rustle of a dress and a slight creak. That was enough for me. I was being watched. I lay down on the bed again, and by Mrs. Vandermeyer brought me some supper. She was still sweet as they make them. I guess she'd been told to win my confidence. Presently she produced the oilskin packet and asked me if I recognized it, watching me like a lynx all the time. I took it and turned it over in a puzzled sort of way. Then I shook my head. I said that I felt I ought to remember something about it, that it was just as though it was all coming back, and then, before I could get hold of it, it went again. Then she told me that I was her niece, and that I was to call her Aunt Rita. I did obediently, and she told me not to worry. My memory would soon come back. That was an awful night. I'd made my plans whilst I was waiting for her. The papers were safe so far, but I couldn't take the risk of leaving them there any longer. They might throw that magazine away any minute. I lay awake, waiting until I judged it to be just about 2 o'clock in the morning. Then I got up as softly as I could and felt in the dark along the left-hand wall. Very gently I unhooked one of the pictures from its nail, Marguerite with her casket of jewels. I crept over to my coat, took out the magazine and an odd envelope or two that I had shoved in. Then I went to the washstand and dampened the brown paper at the back of the picture all round. Presently I was able to pull it away. I had already torn out the two stuck-together pages from the magazine, and now I slipped them with their precious enclosure between the picture and its brown paper backing. A little gum from the envelopes helped me to stick the latter up again. No one would dream the picture had ever been tampered with. I rehung it on the wall, put the magazine back in my coat pocket, and crept back to bed. I was pleased with my hiding place. They'd never think of pulling to pieces They'd never think of pulling to pieces one of their own paintings. I hoped that they'd come to the conclusion that Danvers had been carrying a dummy all along, and that in the end they'd let me go. As a matter of fact, I guess that's what they did think at first, and in a way it was dangerous for me. I learnt afterwards that they nearly did away with me then and there. There was never much chance of their letting me go. But the first man, who was the boss, preferred to keep me alive on the chance of my having hidden them, and being able to tell where, if I recovered my memory. They watched me constantly for weeks. Sometimes they'd ask me questions by the hour. I guess there was nothing they didn't know about the third degree, but somehow I managed to get hold my own. The strain of it was awful, though. They took me back to Ireland, and over every step of the journey again, in case I'd hidden it somewhere en route. Mrs. Vandermeyer and another woman never left me for a moment. They spoke of me as a young relative of Mr. Vandermeyer's, whose mind was affected by the shock of the Lusitania. There was no one I could appeal to for help without giving myself away to them, and if I risked it and failed, and Mrs. Vandermeyer looked so rich and so beautifully dressed that I felt convinced they'd take her word against mine, and think it was part of my mental trouble to think myself persecuted. I felt that the horrors in store for me would be too awful once they knew I'd been only shamming. Sir James nodded comprehendingly. Mrs. Vandermeyer was a woman of great personality. With that and her social position, she would have had little difficulty in imposing her point of view in preference to yours. Your sensational accusations against hers would not have easily have found credence. Well, that's what I thought. It ended in my being sent to a sanatorium in Bournemouth. I couldn't make up my mind at first whether it was a sham affair or genuine. A hospital nurse had charge of me. I was a special patient. She seemed so nice and normal that at last I determined to confide in her. A merciful providence just saved me in time from falling into the trap. My door happened to be ajar, and I heard her talking to someone in the passage. She was one of them. They still fancied it might be a bluff on my part, and she was put in charge of me to make sure. After that, my nerve went completely. I dared trust nobody. I think I almost hypnotized myself. After a while, I almost forgot that I was really Jane Finn. I was so bent on playing the part of Janet Vandermeyer that my nerves began to play tricks. I became really ill. For months I sank into a sort of a stupor. I felt sure I should die soon, and that nothing really mattered. A sane person shut up in a lunatic asylum often ends by becoming insane, they say. I guess I was like that. Playing my part had become second nature to me. I wasn't even unhappy in the end, just apathetic. Nothing seemed to matter, and the years went on. I wonder if it was possibly anhedonia. And then suddenly things seemed to change. Mrs. Vandermeyer came down from London. She and the doctor asked me questions, experimented with various treatments. There was some talk of sending me to a specialist in Paris. In the end, they did not dare risk it. I overheard something that seemed to show that other people, friends, were looking for me. I learned later that the nurse who had looked after me went to Paris and consulted with a specialist, representing herself to be me. He put her through some searching tests and exposed her loss of memory to be fraudulent. But she had taken a note of this method and reproduced them on me. I dare say I couldn't have deceived the specialist for a minute. A man who has made a lifelong study of a thing is unique. But I managed once again to hold my own with them. The fact that I'd not thought of myself as Jane Finn for so long made it easier. One night I was whisked off to London at a moment's notice. They took me back to the house in Soho. Once I got away from the sanatorium, I felt different, as though something in me that had been buried for a long time was waking up again. They sent me in to wait on Mr. Beresford. Of course, I didn't know his name then. I was suspicious. I thought it was another trap, but he looked so honest, I could hardly believe it. However, I was careful in all I said, for I knew we would be overheard. There's a small hole high up in the wall. But on the Sunday afternoon, a message was brought to the house. They were all very disturbed. Without their knowing, I listened. Word had come that he was to be killed. I needn't tell the next part because you know it. I thought I'd have time to rush up and get the papers from their hiding place, but I was caught. So I screamed out that he was escaping, and I said I wanted to go back to Marguerite. I shouted the name 3 times, very loud. I knew the other thing. Sorry. I knew the others would think I meant Mrs. Vandemeyer, but I hoped it might make Mr. Beresford think of the picture. He unhooked one the first day. That's what made me hesitate to trust him. She paused. Then the papers, said Sir James slowly, are still at the back of the picture in that room. Yes? The girl had sunk back on the sofa, exhausted with the strain of the long story. Sir James rose to his feet. He looked at his watch. Come, he said. We must go at once. Tonight? Queried Tuppence, surprised. Tomorrow may be too late, said Sir James gravely. Besides, by going tonight, we have a chance of capturing that great man and super criminal, Mr. Brown. There was dead silence, and Sir James continued. You have been followed here, not a doubt of it. When we leave the house, we shall be followed again, but not molested, for it is Mr. Brown's plan that we are to lead him. But the Soho house is under police supervision night and day. There are several men watching it. When we enter that house, Mr. Brown will not draw back. He will risk all on the chance of obtaining the spark to fire his mine. And he fancies the risk not great, since he will enter in the guise of a friend. Tuppence flushed, then opened her mouth impulsively. But there's something you don't know that we haven't told you. Her eyes dwelt on Jane in perplexity. What is that? Said the other sharply. No hesitations, Miss Tuppence. We need to be sure of our going. But Tuppence, for once, seemed tongue-tied. It's so difficult. You see, if I'm wrong, it would be dreadful. She made a grimace at the unconscious Jane. Never forgive me, she observed cryptically. You want me to help you out, eh? Yes, please. You know who Mr. Brown is, don't you? Yes, said Sir James gravely. At last I do. At last? Queried Tuppence doubtfully. Oh, but I thought... She paused. You thought correctly, Miss Tuppence. I have been morally certain of his identity for some time, ever since the night of Mrs. Vandemeyer's mysterious death. Ah, breathed Tuppence. For there we are up against the logic of facts. There are only 2 solutions. Either the chloral was administered by her own hand, which theory I reject utterly, or else it was administered in the brandy you gave her. Only 3 people touched that brandy. You, Miss Tuppence, I myself, and one other, Mr. Julius Hersheimer. Jane Finn stirred and sat up, regarding the speaker with wide, astonished eyes. At first, the thing seemed utterly impossible. Mr. Hersheimer was the son of a prominent millionaire, was a well-known figure in America. It seemed utterly impossible that he and Mr. Brown would be one and the same, but you cannot escape from the logic of facts. Since the thing was so, it must be accepted. Remember Mrs. Vandemeyer's sudden and inexplicable agitation. Another proof, if proof was needed. I took an early opportunity of giving you a hint. From some words of Mr. Hersheimer's at Manchester, I gathered that you had understood and acted on that hint. Then I set to work to prove the impossible possible. Mr. Beresford rang me up and told me that I had already suspected that the photograph of Miss Jane Finn had never really been out of Mr. Hersheimer's possession. But the girl interrupted. Springing to her feet, she cried out angrily, What do you mean? What are you trying to suggest, that Mr. Brown is Julius? Julius, my own cousin? No, Miss Finn, said Sir James unexpectedly. Not your cousin. The man who calls himself Julius Hersheimer is no relation to you whatsoever. So we're between chapters, so I can chat a little bit. But yeah, in regards to your learning English, that's actually, books is a really great way to do it. And I do only
public domain books, which means that there are several ways that you can get any of. Oh, okay. All right. I wasn't sure. Just in case Ollie was still there, I wanted to say that they could read along in their own copy of the book. Besides, nice little hydration break. We are so close. I'm not sure whether to believe this explanation. I'm still kind of suspicious of James Peel Edgerton. We'll see. We're very near the end. But I did kind of suspect that Annette was, if not her, then, sort of knew who she was. So, it is interesting. I'm enjoying it. The lawyer did it. Yes. Alrighty. Hiding Maestro, we will continue. Chapter 26, Mr. Brown. Sir James' words came like a bombshell. Both girls looked equally puzzled. The lawyer went across to his desk and returned with a small newspaper cutting, which he handed to Jane. Tuppence read it over her shoulder. Mr. Carter would have recognized it. It referred to the mysterious man found dead in New York. "As I was saying to Miss Tuppence," resumed the lawyer, "I set to work to prove the impossible possible. The great stumbling block was the undeniable fact that Julius Hersheimer was not an assumed name. When I came across this paragraph, my problem was solved. Julius Hersheimer set out to discover what had become of his cousin. He went out west, where he obtained news of her and her photograph to aid him in his search. On the eve of his departure from New York, he was set upon and murdered. His body was dressed in shabby clothes and the face disfigured to prevent identification. Mr. Brown took his place. He sailed immediately for England. None of the real Hersheimer's friends or intimates saw him before he sailed, though indeed it would hardly have mattered if they had. The impersonation was so perfect. Since then he had been hand in glove with those sworn to hunt him down. Every secret of theirs had been known to him. Only once did he come near disaster. Mrs. Vandermeyer knew his secret. It was no part of his plan that huge bribe should ever be offered to her. But for Miss Tuppence's fortunate change of plan, she would have been far away from the flat when we arrived there. Exposure stared him in the face. He took a desperate step, trusting in his assumed character to avert suspicion. He nearly succeeded, but not quite. "I can't believe it," murmured Jane. "He seemed so splendid. The real Julius Hersheimer was a splendid fellow, and Mr. Brown is a consummate actor. But ask Miss Tuppence if she also has not had her suspicions." Jane turned mutely to Tuppence. The latter nodded. "I didn't want to say it, Jane. I knew it would hurt you, and after all, I couldn't be sure. I still don't understand why, if he's Mr. Brown, he rescued us." "Was it Julius Hersheimer who helped you to escape?" Tuppence recounted to Sir James the exciting events of the evening, ending up, "But I can't see why." "Can't you? I can. So can young Beresford by his actions. As a last hope, Jane Finn was to be allowed to escape, and the escape must be managed so that she harbors no suspicions of its being a put-up job. They are not averse to young Beresford's being in the neighborhood, and if necessary, communicating with you. They'll take care to get him out of the way at the right minute. Then Julius Hersheimer dashes up, rescues you in true melodramatic style. Bullets fly, but don't hit anybody. What would have happened next? You would have driven straight to the house in Soho and secured the document, which Miss Finn would probably have entrusted to her cousin's keeping. Or, if he conducted the search, he would have pretended to find the hiding place already rifled. He would have
had a dozen ways of dealing with the situation, but the result would have been the same, and I rather fancy some accident would have happened to both of you. You see, you know rather an inconvenient amount. It's a rough outline. I admit I was caught napping, but somebody else wasn't. Tommy, said Tuppence softly. Yes, evidently when the right moment came to get rid of him, he was too sharp for them. All the same, I'm not too easy in my mind about him. Why? Because Julius Hersheimer is Mr. Brown, said Sir James dryly, and it takes more than one man and a revolver to hold up Mr. Brown. Tuppence paled a little. What can we do? Nothing until we've been to the house in Soho. If Beresford has still got the upper hand, there's nothing to fear. If otherwise, our enemy will come to us, and he will not find us. Unprepared. From a drawer in the desk, he took a service revolver and placed it in his coat pocket. Now we're ready. I know better than even to suggest going without you, Miss Tuppence. I should think so, indeed. But I do suggest that Miss Finn should remain here. She will be perfectly safe, and I am afraid she is absolutely worn out with all she has been through. But to Tuppence's surprise, Jane shook her head. No, I guess I'm going too. Those papers were my trust. I must go through with this business to the end. I'm heaps better now anyway. Sir James' car was ordered round. During the short drive, Tuppence's heart beat tumultuously. In spite of momentary qualms of uneasiness respecting Tommy, she could not but feel exultation. They were going to win. The car drew up at the corner of the square, and they got out. Sir James went up to a plainclothesman who was on duty with several others and spoke to him. Then he rejoined the girls. No one has gone into the house so far. It is being watched at the back as well, so they are quite sure of that. Anyone who attempts to enter after we have done so will be arrested immediately. Shall we go in? A policeman produced a key. They all knew Sir James well. They had also had orders respecting Tuppence. Only the third member of the party was unknown to them. The three entered the house, pulling the door to behind them. Slowly they mounted the rickety stairs. At the top was the ragged curtain, hiding the recess where Tommy had hidden that day. Tuppence had heard the story from Jane in her character of Annette. She looked at the tattered velvet with interest. Even now she could almost swear it moved, as though someone was behind it. So strong was the illusion that she almost fancied she could make out the outline of a form. Supposing Mr. Brown, Julius, was there waiting. Impossible, of course. Yet she almost went back to put the curtain aside and make sure. I think she should have. Now they were entering the prison room. No place for anyone to hide there, thought Tuppence with a sigh of relief, then chided herself indignantly. She must not give way to this foolish fancying, this curious, insistent feeling that Mr. Brown was in the house. Hark! What was that? A stealthy footstep on the stair? There was someone in the house. Absurd! She was becoming hysterical. Jane had gone straight to the picture of Marguerite. She unhooked it with a steady hand. The dust lay thick upon it, and festoons of cobwebs lay between it and the wall. Sir James handed her a pocket-knife, and she stripped away the brown paper from the back. The advertisement page of a magazine fell out. Jane picked it up. Holding apart the frayed inner edges, she extracted 2 thin sheets covered with writing. No dummy this time. The real thing. "We've got it," said Tuppence. "At last!" The moment was almost breathless in its emotion. Forgotten the faint creakings, the imagined noises of a minute ago, none of them had eyes for anything but what Jane held in her hand. Sir James took it and scrutinized it attentively. "Yes," he said quietly, "this is the ill-fated draft treaty." "We've succeeded," said Tuppence. There was an awe and almost wondering unbelief in her voice. Sir James echoed her words as he folded the paper carefully and put it away in his pocketbook. Then he looked curiously round the dingy room. "It was here that your friend was confined for so long, was it not?" he said. "A truly sinister room. You notice the absence of windows and the thickness of the close-fitting door. Whatever took place here would never be heard by the outside world." Tuppence shivered. His words woke a vague alarm in her. What if this was someone concealed in the house? Someone who might bar that door on them and leave them to die like rats in a trap. Then she realized the absurdity of her thought. The house was surrounded by police who, if they failed to reappear, would not hesitate to break in and make a thorough search. She smiled at her own foolishness, then looked up with a start to find Sir James watching her. He gave her an emphatic little nod. "Quite right, Miss Tuppence. You scent danger." "So do I. So does Miss Finn." "Yes," admitted Jane. "It's absurd, but I can't help it." Sir James nodded again. "You feel, as we all feel, the presence of Mr. Brown. Yes." As Tuppence made a movement, "Not a doubt of it. Mr. Brown is here." "In this house?" "In this room. You don't understand? I am Mr. Brown." "Yeah, I nailed it." Stupefied, unbelieving, they stared at him. The very lines of his face had changed. It was a different man who stood before them. He smiled a slow, cruel smile. "Neither of you will leave this room alive. You said just now we had succeeded. I have succeeded. The draft treaty is mine." His smile grew wider as he looked at Tuppence. "Shall I tell you how it will be? Sooner or later the police will break in, and they will find 3 victims of Mr. Brown. 3, not 2, you understand. But fortunately the third will not be dead, only wounded, and will be able to describe the attack with a wealth of detail. Treaty? It is in the hands of Mr. Brown, so no one will think of searching the pockets of Mr. James Peel Edgerton." He turned to Jane. "You outwitted me. I make my acknowledgments, but you will not do it again." There was a faint sound behind them, but intoxicated with success he did not turn his head. He slipped his hand into his pocket. "Checkmate to the young adventurers," he said, and slowly raised the big automatic. But even as he did so, he felt himself seized from behind in a grip of iron. The revolver was wrenched from his hands, and the voice of Julius Hersheimer said drawlingly, "I guess you're caught red-handed with the goods upon you." The blood rushed to the K.C.'s face, but his self-control was marvelous as he looked from one to the other of his 2 captors. He looked longest at Tommy. "You," he said beneath his breath. "You! I might have known." Seeing that he was disposed to offer no resistance, their grip slackened. Quick as a flash, his left hand, the hand which bore the big signet ring, was raised to his lips. "I've Caesar!" Sorry, it's French, and I'm unprepared for it. "To mortituri saluton," he said, still looking at Tommy. Then his face changed, and with a long, convulsive shudder, he fell forward in a crumpled heap, whilst an odor of bitter almonds filled the air. He poisoned himself with some... See, bitter almonds, is that arsenic? I do not remember. I've not read many poisoning literatures. Obviously, I have not read much Agatha Christie because I think poison is in a lot of them. Chapter 27. A Supper Party at the Savoy. A supper party, given by Mr. Julius Hersheimer to a few friends on the evening of the 30th, will long be remembered in catering circles. It took place in a private room, and Mr. Hersheimer's orders were brief and forcible. He gave carte blanche, and when a millionaire gives carte blanche, he usually gets it. Every delicacy out of season was duly provided. Waiters carried bottles of ancient or royal vintage with loving care. The floral decorations defied the seasons. Then fruits of the earth as far apart as May and November found themselves miraculously side by side. The list of guests was small and select. The American ambassador, Mr. Carter, who had taken the liberty, he said, of bringing an old friend, Sir William Beresford, with him, Archdeacon Cowley, Dr. Hall, those two youthful adventurers, Miss Prudence Cowley and Mr. Thomas Beresford, and, last but not least, as great guest of honor, Miss Jane Finn. Julius had spared no pains to make Jane's appearance a success. A mysterious knock had brought tuppence to the door of the apartment she was sharing with the American girl. It was Julius. In his hand he held a check. "Say, Tuppence," he began, "will you do me a good turn? Take this and get Jane regularly togged up for this evening. You're all coming to supper with me at the Savoy, see? Spare no expense, you get me?" "Sure thing," mimicked Tuppence. "We shall enjoy ourselves. It will be a pleasure dressing Jane. She's the loveliest thing I ever did see." "That's so," said Mr. Hersheimer fervently. His fervor brought a momentary twinkle to Tuppence's eyes. "By the way, Julius," she remarked demurely, "I haven't given you my answer yet." "Answer?" said Julius. His face paled. "You know, when you asked me to marry you," faltered Tuppence, her eyes downcast in the true manner of the early Victorian heroine. "And wouldn't take no for an answer? I've thought it well over," said "Yes," said Julius. The perspiration stood on his forehead. Tuppence relented suddenly. "You great idiot," she said. "What on earth induced you to do it? I could see at the time you didn't care a twopenny dip for me." "Well, not at all. I had, and still have, the highest sentiments of esteem and respect and admiration for you." Said Tuppence. "Those are the kind of sentiments that very soon go to the wall when the other sentiments come along. Don't they, old thing?" "You don't know what you mean." "I don't know what you mean," said Julius stiffly, but a large and burning blush overspread his countenance. "Shucks," retorted Tuppence. She laughed and closed the door, reopening it to add with dignity, "Morally, I shall always consider I have been jilted." "What was that?" asked Jane as Tuppence rejoined her. "Julius. What did he want?" "Really, I think he wanted to see you, but I wasn't going to let him. Not until tonight, when you're going to burst upon everyone like King Solomon in his glory. Come on, we're going to shop." To most people, the 29th, the much-heralded Labor Day, had passed much as any other day. Speeches were made in the park and Trafalgar Square. Straggling processions, singing the red flag, wandered around the streets in a more or less aimless manner. Newspapers, which had hinted at a general strike and the inauguration of a reign of terror, were forced to hide their diminished heads. The bolder and more astute among them sought to prove that peace had been effected by following their counsels. In the Sunday papers, a brief notice of the sudden death of Sir James Peel Egerton, the famous K.C., had appeared. Monday's paper dealt appreciatively with the dead man's career. The exact manner of his sudden death was never made public. Tommy had been right in his forecast of the situation. It had been a one-man show. Deprived of their chief, the organization fell to pieces. Raymond had made a precipitate return to Russia, leaving England early on a Sunday morning. The gang had fled from Astley Priors in a panic, leaving behind, in their haste, various damaging documents, which compromised them hopelessly. With these proofs of conspiracy in their hands, aided further by a small brown diary taken from the pocket of the dead man, which had contained a full and damning resume of the whole plot, the government had called an 11th-hour conference. The labor leaders were forced to recognize that they had been used as a cat's paw. Certain concessions were made by the government, and were eagerly accepted. It was to be peace, not war. but the cabinet knew by how narrow a margin they had escaped utter disaster, and burnt in on Mr. Carter's brain was the strange scent which had taken place in the house in Soho the night before. He had entered the squalid room to find that great man, the friend of a lifetime, dead, betrayed out of his own mouth. From the dead man's pocketbook he had retrieved the ill-omened draft treaty, and then and there, in the presence of the other three, it had been reduced to ashes. England was saved. And now, on the evening of the 30th, in the private room at the Savoy, Mr. Julius P. Hersheimer was receiving his guests. Mr. Carter was the first to arrive. With him was a choleric-looking old gentleman, at sight of whom Tommy flushed up to the roots of his hair. He came forward. "Ha!" said the old gentleman, surveying him apoplectically. "So, you're my nephew, are you? Not much to look at, but you've done good work, it seems. Your mother must have brought you up well, after all. Shall we let bygones be bygones, eh? You're my heir, you know, and in future I propose to make you an allowance. You can look upon Chalmers Park as your home." "Thank you, sir. It's awfully decent of you." "Where's this young lady I've been hearing such a lot about?" Tommy introduced Tuppence. "Ha!" said Sir Williams, eyeing her. "Girls aren't what they used to be in my young days." "Yes, they are," said Tuppence. "Their clothes are different, perhaps, but they themselves are just the same." "Well, perhaps you're right. Minxes, then. Minxes now." "That's it," said Tuppence. "I'm a frightful minx myself." "I believe you," said the old gentleman, chuckling and pinching her ear in a high good humor. Most young women were terrified of the old bear, as they termed him. Tuppence's pertness delighted the old misogynist. Then came the timid archdeacon, a little bewildered by the company in which he found himself, glad that his daughter was considered to have distinguished herself, but unable to help glancing at her from time to time with nervous apprehension. But Tuppence behaved admirably. She forbore to cross her legs, set a guard upon her tongue, and steadfastly refused to smoke. Dr. Hall came next, and he was followed by the American ambassador. We might as well sit down," said Julius, when he had introduced all his guests to each other. "Tuppence, will you—" He indicated the place of honor with a wave of his hand. But Tuppence shook her head. "No, that's Jane's place. When one thinks of how she's held out all these years, she ought to be made the queen of the feast tonight." Julius flung her a grateful glance, and Jane came forward shyly to the allotted seat. Beautiful as she had seemed before, it was as nothing to the loveliness that now went fully adored. Tuppence had performed her part faithfully. The model gown, supplied by a famous dressmaker, had been entitled "A Tiger Lily." It was all golds and reds and browns, and out of it rose the pure column of the girl's white throat and the bronze masses of hair that crowned her lovely head. There was admiration in every eye as she took her seat. Soon the supper party was in full swing, and with one accord Tommy was called upon for a full and complete explanation. "You've been too darn close about the whole business," Julius accused him. "You let on to me that you were off to the Argentine, though I guess you had your reasons for that. The idea of both you and Tuppence casting me for the part of Mr. Brown just tickles me to death." "The idea was too original to them," said Mr. Carter gravely. "It was suggested, and the poison very carefully instilled, by the past master in the art. The paragraph in the New York paper suggested the plan to him, and by means of it he wove a web that nearly enmeshed you fatally." "I never liked him," said Julius. felt from the first that there was something wrong about him, and I always suspected that it was he who silenced Mrs. Vandermeyer so positively. But it wasn't till I heard that the order for Tommy's execution came right on the heels of our interview with him that Sunday that I began to tumble to the fact that he was the big bug himself. I kind of picked up on that, too. I never suspected it at all, lamented Tuppence. I've always thought I was so much cleverer than Tommy, but he's undoubtedly scored over me handsomely. Julius agreed. Tommy's been the goods this trip, and instead of sitting there as dumb as a fish, let him banish his blushes and tell us all about it. Hear, hear. There's nothing to tell, said Tommy, acutely uncomfortable. I was an awful mug right up to the time I found that photograph of Annette and realized that she was Jane Finn. Then I remembered how persistently she had shouted out that word Marguerite, and I thought of the pictures, and, well, that's that. Then, of course, I went over the whole thing to see where I'd made an ass of myself. Go on, said Mr. Carter, as Tommy showed signs of taking refuge in silence once more. The business about Mrs. Vandermeyer had worried me when Julius told me about it. On the face of it, it seemed that he or Sir James must have done the trick, but I didn't know which. Finding the photograph in the drawer after that story of how it had been got from him by Inspector Brown made me suspect Julius. Then I remembered that it was Sir James who had discovered the false Jane Finn. In the end, I couldn't make up my mind, and I just decided to take no chances either way. I left a note for Julius in case he was Mr. Brown, saying I was off to the Argentine, and I dropped Sir James' letter with the offer of the job by the desk so that he would see it was a genuine stunt. Then I wrote my letter to Mr. Carter to ring up Sir James. Taking him into my confidence would be the best thing either way, so I told him everything except where I believed the papers to be hidden. The way he helped me to get on the track of Tuppence and Annette almost disarmed me, but not quite. I kept my mind open between the two of them, and then I got a bogus note from Tuppence, and then I knew. But how? Tommy took the note in question from his pocket and passed it round the table. It's her handwriting, all right, but I knew it wasn't from her because of the signature. She'd never write her name 2 pence. But anyone who'd never seen it written might quite easily do so. Julius had seen it. He showed me a note of hers to him once. But Sir James hadn't. After that, everything was plain sailing. I sent off Albert post haste to Mr. Carter. I pretended to go away, but doubled back again. And Julius came bursting out in his car. I felt it wasn't part of Mr. Brown's plan, and that there would probably be trouble. Unless Sir James was actually caught in the act, so to speak, I knew Mr. Carter would never believe it of him on my bare word. I didn't, interposed Mr. Carter ruefully. That's why I sent the girls off to Sir James. I was sure they'd fetch up at the house in Soho sooner or later. I threatened Julius with a revolver because I wanted Tuppence to repeat that to Sir James so that he wouldn't worry about us. The moment the girls were out of sight, I told Julius to drive like hell for London, and as we went along, I told him the whole story. We got to the Soho house in plenty of time and met Mr. Carter outside. After arranging things with him, we went in and hid behind the curtain in the recess. The policeman had orders to say, if they were asked, that no one had gone into the house, that's all. And Tommy came to an abrupt halt. There was silence for a moment. By the way, said Julius suddenly, you're all wrong about that photograph of Jane. It was taken from me. But I found it again. Where? Said Tuppence. In that little safe on the wall in Mrs. Vandermeyer's bedroom. I knew you found something, said Tuppence reproachfully. To tell you the truth, that's what started me off suspecting you. Why didn't you say? I guess I was a mite suspicious, too. It had gotten away from me once, and I determined I wouldn't let it let on I got it until a photographer had made a dozen copies of it. We all kept back something or other, said Tuppence thoughtfully. I suppose Secret Service work makes you like that. In the pause that ensued, Mr. Carter took from his pocket a small, shabby brown book. Beresford has just said that I would not have believed Sir James Peel Egerton to be guilty unless, so to speak, he was caught in the act. That is so. Indeed, not until I read the entries in this little book could I bring myself fully to credit the amazing truth. This book will pass into the possession of Scotland Yard, but it will never be publicly exhibited. Sir James's long association with the law would make it undesirable. But to you, who know the truth, I propose to read certain passages, from which will throw some light on the extraordinary mentality of this great man. He opened the book and turned the thin pages. It is madness to keep this book. I know that. It is documentary evidence against me, but I have never shrunk from taking risks, and I feel an urgent need for self-expression. The book will only be taken from my dead body. From an early age I realized that I had exceptional abilities. Only a fool underestimates his capabilities. My brain power was greatly above the average. I know that I was born to succeed. My appearance was the only thing against me. I was quiet and insignificant, utterly nondescript. When I was a boy, I heard a famous murder trial. I was deeply impressed by the power and eloquence of the counsel for the defense. For the first time, I entertained the idea of taking my talents to that particular market. Then I studied the criminal in the dock. The man was a fool. He had been incredibly, unbelievably stupid. Even the eloquence of his counsel was hardly likely to save him. I felt an immeasurable contempt for him. Then it occurred to me that the criminal standard was a low one. It was the wastrels, the failures, the general riffraff of civilization who drifted into crime. Strange that men of brains had never realized its extraordinary opportunities. I played with the idea. What a magnificent field! What unlimited possibilities! It made my brain reel. I read standard works in crime and criminals. They all confirmed my opinion. Degeneracy, disease, never the deliberate embracing of a career by a far-seeing man. Then I considered, supposing my utmost ambitions were realized. Hey, Adie, how are you doing? Sorry, we're getting near the end of the book, but having fun still. By the way, it is, yes, I wanted to, with my Agatha Christie series, I wanted to have the English countryside as the background because, quite a lot of things take place there. And hello to you, Push. How are you doing? This is The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie. It is her fifth or sixth book. And it is one of the few that is in the public domain. I read only public domain books because, the copyright of them has expired. And so, so I don't tread on anybody's copyrights or anything like that. Oh, okay. I have not read Anna Karenina, but I have heard wonderful things. Yeah. It is, she's a lot of fun. And I am reading her for Women's History Month. I put it to a vote for for the community to vote which of the female authors I would read this month. Though I have read her, of course, out of Women's History Month. So, welcome to the stream. Okay, I don't know if I've ever read any Russian literature yet. I know that some of them are quite big, and I haven't really ventured into any very big books for story time, though I was playing with the idea of reading Mary Shelley's The Last Man, which is enormous, and also
Wilkie Collins' The Lady in White, which is also enormous. I have not heard of something about that. I can look it up lately, and actually, if you wanted to message to me, I have my tweets. Hold on a second. My tweets, oh my gosh. My socials, where my Twitter is, also my Discord, where, you can join on the community. We strongly encourage pet pictures and the like. And then if you also wanted to listen to any of my past story times, they are all there on my YouTube. And I try to put them all in playlist form so that you can, just get started at number 1 and keep going. Though I need to clean up this one, I think. I need to play some cleanup with that. I do not, and I'm not really interested in the whole romance thing, but I also keep my personal life separate from my streaming life, so I hope you'll appreciate that and understand it. Thank you very much. I do work, when I'm not streaming, I do work at an independent bookstore. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I try to be, because, there's so much frustrations and tension in the world, and I don't want to bring to any of that. I want to make things soft and nice and easy and stuff like that. But yeah, feel free to join me on Twitter or on Discord and, any of that. I'm going to go ahead and continue. Oh, I should have put, I have Maestro right here that I put. He is my kitty boy. I have, let's see. I have 2 cats, and you can see them in the picture around my little webcam. So when I have him right up here, that means that I'm chatting between chapters, and then when I have him disappeared, that means that I'm in the middle of reading. So I'm almost finished with the story. We have, let's see, we just have a few pages left, and then I'll chat a little bit more afterwards. So I'll talk to you in a moment. I read standard works on crime and criminals. They all confirmed my opinions. Degeneracy, disease, never the deliberate embracing of a career by a far-seeing man. Then I considered, supposing my utmost ambitions were realized, that I was called to the bar and rose to the height of my profession. Then I entered politics. Say even that I became Prime Minister of England. What then? Was that power? Hampered at every turn by my colleagues, fettered by the democratic system, of which I should be the mere figurehead? No. The power I dreamed of was absolute. An autocrat, a dictator, and such power could only be obtained by working outside the law. To play on the weakness of human nature, then on the weaknesses of nations, to get together and control a vast organization, and finally to overpower the existing order and rule. The thought intoxicated me. I saw that I must lead 2 lives. A man like myself is bound to attract notice. I must have a successful career which would mark my true activities. Also, I must cultivate a personality. I modeled myself upon famous KCs. I reproduced their mannerisms, their magnetism. If I had chosen to be an actor, I should have been the greatest actor living. No disguises, no grease paint, no false beards. Personality. I put it on like a glove. When I shed it, I was myself, quiet, unobtrusive, man like every other man. I called myself Mr. Brown. There were hundreds of men called Mr. Brown. There are hundreds of men looking just like me. I succeeded in my false career. I was bound to succeed. I shall succeed in the other. A man like me cannot fail. I have never been reading a life of Napoleon. He and I have much in common. I keep a practice of defending criminals. A man should look after his own people.
Once or twice I have felt afraid. The first time was in Italy. There was a dinner given. Professor D, the great alienist, was present. The talk fell on insanity. He said, "A great many men are mad, but no one knows it. They do not know it themselves." I do not understand why he looked at me when he said that. His glance was strange. I did not like it. The war has disturbed me. I thought it would further my plans. The Germans are so efficient. Their spy system, too, was excellent. The streets are full of these boys in khaki, all empty-headed young fools. Yet I do not know. They won the war. It disturbs me. My plans are going well. A girl butted in. I do not think she really knows anything, but we must give up the Estonia. No risks now. All goes well. The loss of memory is vexing. It cannot be a fake. No girl could deceive me. 29th. That is very soon. Mr. Carter paused. I will not read the details of the coup that was planned, but there are just 2 small entries that refer to the 3 of you. In the light of what happened, they are interesting. By inducing the girl to come to me of her own accord, I have succeeded in disarming her. But she has intuitive flashes that might be dangerous. She must be got out of the way. I can do nothing with the American. He suspects and dislikes me, but he cannot know. I fancy my armor is impregnable. Sometimes I fear I have underestimated the other boy. He is not clever, but it is hard to blind his eyes to facts. Mr. Carter shut the book. A great man, he said. Genius or insanity, who can say? There was silence. Then Mr. Carter rose to his feet. I will give you a toast. The joint venture, which has so amply justified itself by success. It was drunk with acclamation. Something more we want to know, continued Mr. Carter. He looked at the American ambassador. I speak for you also, I know. We'll ask Miss Jane Finn to tell us the story that only Miss Tuppence has heard so far, but before we do, so we'll drink her health. The truth of one of the bravest of America's daughters, to whom is due the thanks and gratitude of 2 great countries. And now on to the last chapter. Chapter 28, and after. Oh, hey, Diamond, how are you doing? Okay. That's interesting. Well, I mean, sleep does kind of feel like a time warp. Like, dreams can seem so long, but they're apparently just instantaneous. It's amazing what the mind can do. Chapter 28, and after. That was a mighty good toast, Jane, said Mr. Hersheimer, as he and his cousin were being driven back in the Rolls-Royce to the Ritz. The one to the joint venture? No, the one to you. There isn't another girl in the world who could have carried it through as you did. You were just wonderful. Jane shook her head. I don't feel wonderful. At heart, I'm just tired and lonesome and longing for my own country. That brings me to something I wanted to say. I heard the ambassador telling you his wife hoped you would come to the embassy right away. That's good enough, but I've got another plan. Jane, I want you to marry me. Don't get scared and say no at once. You can't love me right away. Of course, that's impossible, but I've loved you from the very moment I set eyes on your photo. And now I've seen you, I'm simply crazy about you. But you'll only marry me. If you'll only marry me, I won't worry you any. You shall take your own time. Maybe you'll never come to love me, and if that's the case, I'll manage to set you free. But I want the right to look after you and take care of you. Sorry, earbud. That's what I want, said the girl wistfully. Someone who will be good to me. Oh, you don't know how lonesome I feel. Sure thing I do. Then I guess that's all fixed up, and I'll see the Archbishop about a special license tomorrow morning. Oh, Julius! Well, I don't want to hustle you any, Aunt Jane, but there's no sense in waiting. Don't be scared. I shan't expect you to love me all at once. But a small hand was slipping into his. I love you now, Julius, said Jane Finn. I loved you that first moment in the car when the bullet grazed your cheek. 5 minutes later, Jane murmured softly, I don't know London very well, Julius, but it is such a very long way from the Savoy to the Ritz. It depends on how you go, explained Julius unblushingly. We're going by way of Regent's Park. Oh, Julius, what will the chauffeur think? At the wages I pay him, he knows better than to do any independent thinking. Why, Jane, the only reason I had this supper at the Savoy was so that I could drive you home. I didn't see how I was ever going to get hold of you alone. You and Tuppence have been sticking together like Siamese twins. I guess another day of it would have driven me and Beresford stark raving mad. Oh, is he? Of course he is. Head over ears. I thought so, said Jane thoughtfully. Why? Well, from all the things Tuppence didn't say. There you have me beat, said Hersheimer, but Jane only laughed. In the meantime, the young adventurers were sitting bolt upright, very stiff and ill at ease, in a taxi which, with a singular lack of originality, was also returning to the Ritz via Regent's Park. A terrible constraint seemed to have settled down between them. Without quite knowing what had happened, everything seemed changed. They were tongue-tied, paralyzed. All the old camaraderie was gone. Tuppence could think of nothing to say. Tommy was equally afflicted. They sat very straight and forbore to look at each other. At last Tuppence made a desperate effort. Rather fun, wasn't it? Rather. Another silence. I like Julius, essayed Tuppence again. Tommy was suddenly galvanized into life. You're not to marry him, do you hear? He said dictatorially. I don't know why I had problems with that word. I forbid it. Oh, said Tuppence meekly. Absolutely, you understand? He doesn't want to marry me. You really only asked me out of kindness. He really only asked me out of kindness. That's not very likely, scoffed Tommy. It's quite true. He's head over ears in love with Jane. I expect he's proposing to her now. She'll do for him very nicely, said Tommy condescendingly. Don't you think she's the most lovely creature you have ever seen? Oh, I dare say. But I suppose you prefer Sterlingworth, said Tuppence demurely. Oh, dash it all, Tuppence, you know. I like your uncle, Tommy, said Tuppence, hastily creating a diversion. By the way, what are you going to do? Accept Mr. Carter's offer of a government job, or accept Julius' invitation and take a richly remunerated post in America on his ranch? I shall stick to the old ship, I think, though it's awfully good for Hersheimer. But I feel you'd be more at home in London. I don't see where I come in. I do, said Tommy positively. Tuppence stole a glance at him sideways. There's the money, too, she observed thoughtfully. What money? We're going to get a check each. Mr. Carter told me so. Did you ask how much? Inquired Tommy sarcastically. Yes, said Tuppence triumphantly, but I shan't tell you. Tuppence, you are the limit. It has been fun, hasn't it, Tommy? I do hope we shall have lots more adventures. You're insatiable, Tuppence. I've had quite enough adventures for the present. Well, shopping is almost as good, said Tuppence dreamily, thinking of buying old furniture and bright carpets and futurist silk curtains and a polished dining table and a divan with lots of cushions. Hold hard, said Tommy. What's all this for? Probably a house, but I think a flat. Whose flat? You think I minded saying? Do you think I mind saying it? But I don't in the least. Ours, so there. You darling! Cried Tommy, his arms tightly around her. I was determined to make you say it. Oh, I owe you something for the relentless way you've squashed me whenever I tried to be sentimental. Tuppence raised her face to his. The taxi proceeded in its course round the north side of Regent's Park. "You haven't really proposed now," pointed out Tuppence. "Now that our grandmothers would like to not what our grandmothers would call a proposal, but after listening to a rotten one like Julius's, I'm inclined to let you off. You won't be able to get out of marrying me, so don't you think it." "Oh, what fun it will be," responded Tuppence. "Marriage is called all sorts of things, a haven, a refuge, a crowning glory, and a state of bondage, and lots more. But do you know what I think it is?" "What?" "A sport. And a damn good sport, too," said Tommy. The end. So thank you once again for joining me for story time. Next story time is going to be tomorrow, 2 o'clock Pacific time, and we're going to be starting The Secret of Chimneys, which is another Agatha Christie novel. So I hope you'll be joining me, and if not, that is totally get it, quite all right. I hope you have a great weekend. So do you have any suggestions? Oh, yes, let me go get Snockings for her treat. I will be right back. Are you bringing Snockings? Not. Okay, where is Snockings? Alrighty. Hey, Snockings. Time for a treat. Let's see. Wish I could figure out a good place to set the camera so you can see Snockings having her treat. But at least you'll get some ASMR. Snockings, it's over here. Tip it down. Here we go. This is from Corel. I will do that. Do you have any suggestions for who we might raid, Corel? Sorry about the unsteady cam. That was it. Yeah, you're sweet. And I'll see who else is streaming. UK might still be streaming. It looks like she went live. Don't remember how long ago. We shall see. All right. Alrighty, who do we have? We have many people. So UK is still streaming, and then we've got Mr. Chili, and we've got Milky Berry. It has been a little while since we have rated. Hang on a second. I just gotta get this unwrapped around. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think we'll raid UK. Oops, that was wrong. Yeah, alrighty. Well, thank you again so much for hanging out with me. And I hope to see you tomorrow. And if not, I will see you the next time. Oh, yeah. Getting my raid message ready. There we go. All right. Have a good rest of your weekend. Bye.